Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
Some time ago, I had decided to go on a little personal vacation out into the woods of northern Arizona. I was experiencing a sort malaise that was really messing with my creative flow, and I needed a chance to really knuckle down and just enjoy the natural world again. I had spent 6 days out in the wilderness, just enjoying the feeling of being in nature, but the night of day 7 was one I will never forget. Noise. Something was waking me up. Groggily, I rolled over and looked at my phone. It was ringing. I looked to the top of it and blinked. No signal. That made sense. I had come out here for the isolation, a chance to clear my head and make some music again. So why was my phone ringing? How was my phone ringing? I stared at the number as my phone rang incessantly. An unknown caller. I heaved a tired sigh, swiped to answer, and croaked blearily, "Hello." "You need to be ready. It knows you're there and it's already here. It has come for you," came the voice on the other line. "Who is this? Who am I speaking to?" I asked, the exhaustion beginning to leave my voice. "Be ready, it will be there soon. Don't open the door." The line went dead, my phone blinked, and the words "signal lost" flashed on the screen. "Don't open." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and wearily watched my phone, waiting to see if it would ring again. "I must be losing it," I murmured, placing my phone back on the nightstand and rolling back over to go to sleep. That's when the house thundered. Booming knocks shook the glass of the windows and rattled the glassware. Jesus. I spun to the door of my room and my mouth dropped. My door was closed, but it was shaking like something was trying to get in. Boom, boom, boom. 3 knocks in short succession thundered against my bedroom door. I didn't remember locking it. The only door I locked was the front. It was the only one I figured I needed to out here. The angered knocking came again. 3 strong blows and the rattling began anew. It shook the door, and as I watched, I saw the frame begin to crack. My phone rang and the rattling stopped. Sparing a glance, I snatched it off the nightstand and looked at the number. Unknown caller again. Shakily, I swiped to answer the call and brought the phone to my ear, saying nothing. "It knows you're in there. It isn't going to be polite for long. Get under the bed. Hide." Then the line went dead again. Signal lost. I looked at the cracking door frame and wasted no time taking this mysterious caller's advice. Quickly, I crawled under the bed and watched. It was only minutes. I knew it was only minutes, but it felt like hours. I stared at the door, terror wrapping its cold arms around my gut. My breathing became ragged as my eyes remained glued to the door. It wasn't moving. There was no knocking. Had the caller been wrong this time? Was it done? Had it just given up? What was it? Questions raced through my skull, each firing out of the cannon of doubt before the next one could be rationalized. Could any of this be rationalized though? Something had called me up and warned me of something else in my house. Now that something else was just outside my door. I couldn't explain it, but I had this feeling. Like whatever it was that was out there was waiting for me to make a move. Like we were in some kind of terrible chess game. So I watched. I waited beneath that bed for agonizing minutes. The sounds began shortly after that. Soft scratching noises, almost inaudible from my position. The one my signalist savior alleged would keep me safe. I never let my gaze drift from the door, and I'm glad I kept it there because watching what happened next defied logic. The door itself began to bulge inward. I could hear the wood splintering as the center continued to bubble toward me. Then it exploded. Debris and lethal wooden scrap fired throughout the bedroom. I wasn't spared when this happened. My hiding place provided shelter from the brunt of the door's destruction, but I was peppered with fragments of splintered wood that dug themselves into my skin. I wanted to cry out in pain, but the sight of what was beyond caught the scream in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, I saw a pair of feet. Massive legs that must have been at least 3 feet across themselves, but that wasn't the strangest thing. The skin was no tone I had ever seen on a human. It was this mossy green and brown, and the texture was so wooden, like a pair of tree trunks. Slowly, the thing in my doorway ambled its way into my room. I could hear its heavy, ragged breaths like some sort of hunting beast. It was at the foot of my bed. The scent of moss and pine clung heavily to it, but there was another scent I caught as it just stood there. Rot. Death. The pungent odor of decaying meat clung to the creature's wooden legs. I had to cover my nose and mouth to keep from retching as it circled the bed. Was it going to throw it up and pull me out from underneath? Was this monster just waiting for the perfect chance to tear me to shreds? What was it? The feet turned and suddenly my blood felt like ice. My whole body shivered as the temperature in the room suddenly plummeted. I could see my breath as this thing let out an ear-shattering roar. I can't place the sound, but it reminded me of a mixture between a jet engine's roar and a grizzly bear's growl. I watched from my hiding place as the nightstand was lifted and launched across the room. I could only hear the thing shatter as the creature tore the place apart. My eyes were discs in my head, my hands were clamped over my mouth to hide any sounds of breathing or whimpering, but just as it spun to face the bed, it stopped. Instead, whatever it was turned and shambled out of my room. What? They were the only words I could choke out as the creature disappeared from my sight. Then the phone rang again. Terrified, I seized it, trying to silence the ringer. I swiped to answer the caller and immediately began to whisper into the phone. What was that? Who are you? How did you know it was coming? There's no time for any of that. It knows where you are. You need to run. Jump out the window and keep running until you lose sight of this place. Keep going until you reach the highway. Don't come back until morning. Are you kidding me? That thing is huge. I can't outrun it. You have to. It's the only way you win this. Then the call cut out. Signal lost. I steadied my breathing and psyched myself up, shooting out from under the bed as I heard that dreadful roar again. It was coming back. I didn't have time to think. No time to find shoes. I bolted toward the now shattered window and dove, slicing my arms and legs against the shards of glass. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, urging me to ignore everything else. I ran, bolted through the forest as fast as my legs would carry me. Twigs and rocks tore into my feet, but I kept going, even as my chest began to tighten and my lungs began to feel like there was a fire being set beneath them. I ran. I couldn't hear the monster behind me anymore. Maybe it stayed at my cabin, maybe it kept looking elsewhere. Every ounce of me just hoped I had gotten lucky, but the voice on the phone told me to keep running until I hit the highway, so I did. I ran through miles of backcountry woods, never stopping, pushing myself far beyond anything I thought I was capable of, just to get away from whatever the hell that thing was. I could see darkness starting to push its way into my vision. My legs were beginning to feel like they were made of stone. My body ached and every muscle screamed for me to stop, but I kept pushing. When I burst through the tree line onto the road, I stopped. Almost instantly, I began sobbing and I dropped to my knees. I gazed up at the moon as my phone began to ring again. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the number. Before I could do anything else, darkness overtook me. I woke the following day in a hospital bed. Apparently, someone had discovered my unconscious and bloodied body on the side of the road. The sheriffs had a million questions, none of which I had a good answer for. They thought my story sounded like something I made up, but when they went to the cabin, many of them were singing a different tune. It looks like you got lucky and escaped one of the biggest bears I've ever seen. One of them said, didn't find it, but the claw marks in the wood made it look like a dinosaur. Grizzlies are huge, son, but not even they leave marks like that. When I asked about the phone calls, they just shook their heads. There's no cell service that far out. You might have imagined that part and everything. It took me over a week to recover from my injuries. I was told I had lacerated a tendon in my right arm, and that it had never quite functioned the way it had before. That was the arm I used to play guitar, and to this day there are still certain notes my fingers just can't quite nail anymore. The day of my discharge, I was given the things that they had found me with, and given an escort back to the cabin. The debris was mostly cleaned up by the time I arrived to collect my things, but the damage to the building itself was visible, and the cops were right. Whatever the hell it was that came after me that night must have been massive to leave the marks it did so deep in the wood. I checked my phone as I crossed the threshold of the house to gather my things inside. No signal. Well, thanks whoever you were, I muttered, gathering what stuff was left after the attack. To this day, I don't know who called me or what it was that was in that cabin, but frankly, I don't think I want to know. My wife, Mia, and I were driving cross-country. It was our first attempt at the Great American Road Trip. Mia and I rented a small RV, more of a camper than a full-blown RV. We packed up a couple suitcases with plenty of room for any souvenirs, and we hit the dusty trail. We started our journey on the Mother Road, Route 66, driving south from Chicago until we connected to Interstate 70 and shot straight west through Missouri. The goal was to see those parts of the country we had never seen before, stopping anywhere that seemed interesting, from the plains of Kansas up through the Badlands of Wyoming and South Dakota. In Missouri, we saw the world's largest cap gun. In Kansas, we visited the Evel Knievel Museum and the world's largest belt buckle. We love all those kitschy tourist trap places. Eventually, we made it to Colorado, and after a few hours more of driving through amber waves of grain, we saw them, the Rocky Mountains. We made an exit and headed north through the winding mountain highways. The Rockies were gorgeous, snow-capped in the middle of summer. Some of the peaks pierced through the white, fluffy clouds. We saw a sign that read "Traffic Tunnel 3 miles." A little further, and sure enough, there it was, a large tunnel bored directly through the mountain in front of us. A large sign read, "Pike Tunnel, longest traffic tunnel in the nation. Please turn your headlights on now." "How long is it?" asked Mia. "That's what she said," I quipped. But she was right. There was no information beyond the detail that this was the longest tunnel in the nation. "Can't be more than a mile or two," I said as I watched the little white car ahead of us slip into the darkness. A moment later, we joined it. The tunnel was lit by fluorescence that gave everything a greenish-yellow tinge. On the left-hand side was a raised walkway behind a railing for maintenance access. Initially, I was struck by the incredible amount of work that went into the construction of this man-made marvel. "We're under 1,000,000 tons of Rocky Mountain right now," I said. "How many years before this caves in?" Mia responded. I shot her a look. "Let's save the cave-in talk until we're out on the other side." "I'm just saying nature will take this back eventually," she continued. I scanned the empty road ahead of us. "Where did the other car go?" I asked. We were now alone in the tunnel, no cars ahead of us nor behind us. They must have sped off ahead. Maybe they're scared of a cave-in." My Spotify playlist had stopped playing. Mia looked at the phone. No cell service. She turned on the radio and spun the dial only to find static. "You're not going to be able to pick up a station in here," I said. She turned the volume down. "Just wanted to check. If only we had some CDs. This tunnel really keeps going." "I would have thought we'd be through it by now," I replied. I looked at the RV's odometer. 45,600 miles. I picked up speed. I wanted to try and catch up to the little white car. Up until this point, the tunnel was a straight shot, but now the tunnel started to curve to the right. It may have been my imagination, but it also felt as though we were descending. Mia felt it too, and she started to get antsy. "Where did that other car go? How long is this tunnel?" There was an urgency in her voice. I was getting nervous. Claustrophobia was not usually a problem for me, but when I looked down at the odometer and I saw that it had gone up by 3 miles, my mind began to wander to unsettling places. We were descending in altitude. I could feel it. I could see a slope in the lights on the ceiling and the railing of the maintenance walkway. I could feel a pressure in my head and I was getting cold. "Could you grab me a Coke from the back, Mia?" I couldn't have Mia getting anxious. That would only start a chain reaction and make me freak out, which would then make her freak out. She unbuckled and ducked into the back of the RV to where we had a cooler stocked with drinks and food. Just as she stepped into the back, I saw something. There, standing on the side of the road, was a man wearing a reflective safety vest and a hard hat. He was waving to me as I passed him by. Something about him looked strange. I watched him in the side view mirror as we passed, and he was still watching the RV, still waving at the back of our vehicle as he faded into the distance. Mia reappeared from the back of the RV, Coke in hand. She popped it and handed it to me. "You look worried." "I'm fine," I smiled and took a sip of the Coke. "Eric, slow down." I slammed on the brakes as I saw what made Mia scream. In the road in front of us was a roadblock. 2 reflective traffic sawhorses blocked both lanes of the tunnel. Beyond the roadblock, the lights of the tunnel were dark. There was nothing but a void of blackness. Standing in front of the roadblock was another man wearing a reflective vest and a hard hat. Only this time his hard hat had a light on top which obscured his face. We came to a jolting stop. I turned to Mia. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "It's a cave-in, isn't it?" God, I hope not. I rolled down the window, leaned out and yelled to the man in the hard hat. "Hey, what's going on?" The man was about 5 yards away. He took 2 steps towards us and then raised a hand to his mouth and yelled, "Just doing some maintenance." "How long is it gonna take?" I yelled back. The man made a hand gesture as if he didn't hear me. "How long is it gonna take?" I called again. He made the same gesture. I unbuckled my seatbelt and grabbed the door release. "What are you doing?" Mia asked. "I gotta know what's going on." "Eric, just stay here. It might not be safe." "I'll be just a second," I said. I pushed the door open and stepped down from the RV. "Stay in your vehicle," the man yelled. He took a couple steps towards me with his hand out, telling me to stop. "What's the holdup?" I shouted. The man was a bit closer now, but I still couldn't see his face through the shining light on his helmet. "Please stay in your vehicle," he shouted. There was something off about him. Then I heard it. A scream or something rolled from deep in the tunnel. The worker turned and looked into the darkness. Then he ran past the barricades, and soon all we could see of him was the light on his helmet. The light disappeared a moment later. "What the hell was that? Is someone hurt?" Mia asked. "I have no idea," I said. "Should we do something?" Mia asked. I just sat there and watched the pitch black tunnel in front of me. I had no idea what to tell her. I checked the side view mirrors. There was still nobody behind us. "Where are the other cars?" I asked. "They must have gotten through before the roadblock. Or maybe they caused the roadblock," Mia replied. "I saw another worker a little ways back. We could try to go back and talk to him. We'd be going straight into any oncoming cars. There's a maintenance walkway. We didn't pass him that long ago. We can probably catch him on foot. Maybe we should just wait for the guy to come back." She reached over and grabbed my arm. I squeezed her hand. She was right. I looked out at the tunnel ahead of us. I turned on the RV's high beams, but all I could see beyond the roadblock was more tunnel and more road. I checked my phone. Unsurprisingly, there was no service still. We waited, but the man never came back. "It's been 20 minutes, Mia said. "How come there hasn't been another car behind us?" I was having the same thought. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out. I looked back at the road behind us. It went back about 200 yards before curving out of sight. There was no sign of that first worker I saw on the maintenance walkway. I looked at the roadblock ahead of us and clicked on the RV's high beams. There was nothing beyond the roadblock but more tunnel. It didn't look like it was under construction, just very dark. "I think we should keep going," I said. "What about the roadblock?" "We'll move those sawhorses out of the way and just drive past," I said as I opened my door. Mia looked at me, then she cast her eyes to the dark tunnel ahead of us. I knew she was processing the same limited options that I was. Driving backwards would be a huge risk in the instance of another car finally coming along. Getting out and walking would take God knows how long. We could have driven 10 miles at this point. Forward was our best option. "Let's do it," Mia said. We jumped out and quickly pulled the two sawhorses out of the right lane. I pulled the RV up past the barriers, then we jumped out again and put the sawhorses back where they were. We didn't need another car to come barreling through. We were finally moving again, slowly. It was pitch black save for the high beams of the RV. We crept forward at around 15 miles per hour. As the tunnel turned and twisted, my eyes started to play tricks on me. I kept seeing shapes at the furthest point of the tunnel. I kept seeing something standing just at the end of the next bend, but as we rolled forward, there was nothing there. "Where are the workers?" Mia asked. "I don't know." I was done rationalizing. This was all wrong. Traffic tunnels are never this long. My mind started to wander to all the road trip urban legends I'd read about. The killer in the backseat, the disappearing gas station, the pale man in the cornfield. Did we stumble into some strange outlier location? An in-between point on the endless roads that cross this country? Then I saw it. "Look, a person, thank God," Mia shouted. As we rounded a curve in the tunnel, a group of maintenance workers entered our view. The three of them stood on the left side of the road behind two more sawhorses topped with flashing lights. Two of them faced towards us, the third was facing the other two. The one with his back to us wore a light on his hard hat. Was this the same guy we saw earlier? How did he get this far away? I approached slowly and rolled down the window. "Hey, you left us waiting back there," I yelled. There was no response. In fact, all three men were completely silent, and it was hard to tell in the flashing light of the sawhorses, but they looked to be standing completely still. "Hello?" I yelled again. I pushed open my door and stepped out onto the pavement. "Eric, wait." I held up a finger to Mia. "Just a second." I slowly stepped towards the three men. "Hello?" No response. What the? The bright lights of the sawhorses obscured their faces. I kept moving closer. "Hey, what's going on?" Then I saw it at their faces. They were plastic. In front of me stood three mannequins. I backed away toward the RV, then I turned and walked hurriedly to the vehicle. I was seriously freaked out, but I didn't want to alarm Mia. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. "They're mannequins," I said. "What?" "They're mannequins." "Why, what?" "I don't know." I looked back over at the three figures and my blood ran cold. The hard hat mannequin had somehow turned around to face us. All three figures appeared to be watching us now. Then we heard it. A loud resonant banging on the side and then the roof of the RV. "What the hell was that?" Mia whispered. We listened, holding our breath. Then dash. A shuffling sound, dash dash. Something was moving on or in the RV. "Stay here," I said. I got up. "Eric, wait." I moved to the back of the RV. It was dark. I went for a drawer in the kitchenette space and pulled out a flashlight. I moved to the rear of the RV, the bedroom. My flashlight illuminated an empty room. Whoever is back here, I have a gun. A terrible bluff, but I didn't see anything. I shone the light out of the windows of each side of the RV. Nothing. Then I heard it. A shuffling sound from right above me. I looked up and screamed, "Crap." On the roof of the RV, staring through the skylight, was a woman with vacuous black eyes and a dead smile. Her stringy black hair dangled down towards me, casting thin black shadows across her horrible pale face. "Mia, drive, fast," I screamed. Mia jumped over to the driver's seat, shifted into gear, and stomped on the gas. The RV was clunky, but it could move when it needed to. We lurched forward and I fell back. I trained my flashlight up onto the skylight again and the woman was gone. I scrambled to my feet and looked out of the side windows. Did Mia shake her off? There was no sign of the woman. I moved to the passenger seat, breathing heavily and sweating. "What happened?" she asked, keeping the RV at a steady 50 miles per hour. "There was a woman on the roof," I said flatly. I realized now that I was in a kind of shock. "A woman?" Her eyes were black. Mia just looked at me, then back at the tunnel ahead of us. "There's something wrong with this tunnel," I whispered. Mia pointed at the road ahead. "Look." I looked out at the tunnel. There were more mannequins. A lot more mannequins. They were positioned on both sides of the road. They were all facing us, and even though I never saw them move, when I looked in the side view mirror, they were somehow still facing us, turning to watch us as we drove past, watching without eyes. "Just keep driving," I said. As we drove on, the mannequins crowded the sides of the road more and more. There were thousands of them. Eventually they were so close that some of their outstretched arms hit the side of the RV. They were closing in on us, squeezing our path forward. One stood in the middle of the road. "I don't think I can get around it." "Run it over, don't stop." The RV smashed into the mannequin. Its head shot forward and bounced against the windshield, and the vehicle shuddered as it rolled over the body. Soon there were 2 in the road, then 3. I could see where this was going. Pretty soon there would be too many for the RV to ram through, but god damn it, we were going to get through as many as we could. "Speed up, Mia." Crash. The sound was surreal, smashing into mannequin after mannequin at nearly 60 miles per hour. Hands, legs, heads, and torsos flew. The windshield cracked, the RV shuddered and screamed, and eventually slowed down, despite the screaming engine. I'm certain the axle was jammed up with lifeless, plastic body parts. Eventually we came to a stop. "She won't move," Mia said. She pressed on the gas, but it was no use. The RV just rocked a little bit. "Try reverse." She shifted and pressed on the gas. We got some decent movement before running into another jam. "Crap. Should we get out and look?" Mia asked. "I'll go," I said as I grabbed the flashlight and popped the passenger door. Mia unbuckled her seatbelt. "We'll go together." We stumbled out of the RV on the passenger side. It was like stepping into hell. Countless lifeless faces stared out at us from the darkness. The only light came from the headlights of the RV and my flashlight. We clumsily made our way along the side of the RV. The ground was littered with mannequin pieces. I thought to myself, if we could get a couple yards cleared out behind the rear tires, we might be able to back out and get enough momentum to reverse all the way back out of here. Instead, when we got to the back of the RV, my stomach flipped and my heart sank. I was expecting to see a trail of flattened mannequins. Instead, the RV was now surrounded by thousands of perfectly intact mannequins standing at attention, as if their ranks had somehow been replenished after our vehicular assault. "This is impossible." She started to cry. I held her close. "We'll keep moving," I said. "It will never end. The tunnel makes no sense. It only curves one direction." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This whole time the tunnel has only been curving to the right. It would sometimes straighten out or go left for a few yards, but before too long we were curving to the right again. We've either been driving in circles or spiraling downwards. So we'll go back the way we came and hope we're not going in circles," I said. We had been driving for hours at this point. Walking back out the way we came would take days. But now that I thought about it, Mia was right. We'd only been curving to the right. This tunnel seemed to be very gradually taking us downwards into the earth. Going forward would not get us any closer to escape. "We'll need food from the RV," Mia said. I nodded and we stumbled our way back to the front of the RV, the mannequins' lifeless faces watching us the whole time. I stepped up to the passenger door and nearly fell back when I looked through the window. "What the heck?" I breathed. What I saw were 2 mannequins sitting in the driver's and passenger seat. How they got in there, I have no idea, but but what really made my blood run cold was that they were dressed exactly like Mia and I. They wore identical sets of clothes. The one in the passenger seat had my same New Order t-shirt and black jeans. The one in the driver's seat had Mia's green striped sweater and denim shorts. Their plastic faces stared out through the shattered windshield at the endless crowd of mannequins staring back at them. Mia stepped up and saw the uncanny display. "What the?" Mia echoed. I pulled myself up into the RV and slowly stepped around my mannequin doppelganger. I avoided looking into its face, but I swear I could feel it watching me as I stumbled around it. Mia followed and we made our way into the back of our dark RV. Luckily, we had just stocked our cooler full of deli meat and water not long after crossing the Colorado state line. I handed Mia the flashlight and pulled open the cooler. I filled a backpack full of food and water. I turned and saw them. My mannequin double had somehow moved. It was standing in the aisle watching us. Mia's doppelganger was still seated in the driver's seat but had turned to peer back at us with its eyeless gaze. Mia saw the look in my eyes and turned. She screamed when she saw them and backed into me. I put my arm around her and we stood there a moment, letting our skyrocketing heart rates return to earth. "Let's get out of here," I said. I slid the backpack onto my shoulders. Mia joined me at the door. I looked into her eyes. "Are you ready?" She nodded. I kissed her. "I love you," I said. "I love you," she said. The look on her face killed me. She was terrified. I'm sure the look on my face was similar. I opened the door and we stepped out. We again stumbled to the back of the RV. Once we were clear of the RV and all the crushed mannequin body parts, it became easier to find footing, though weaving through an endless crowd of lifeless people was a slow process. It was pitch black. Without the flashlight, we wouldn't be able to see a foot in front of us. As I walked, the beam of light created the illusion of movement in the crowd. At least I hoped it was an illusion. The limbs of the mannequins seemed to stretch and turn, but the only sound was that of Mia and I shuffling our way through the crowded tunnel. Things went on like this for what felt like hours. Mia and I were sweating and aching. I was about to suggest we stop and rest, but then I saw it and I froze. Out in the crowd, beyond rows of blank faces, I saw a pale face, black hair, and a dead smile. I saw two vacuous eyes staring right at me. "Mia, do you see her?" I whispered, and "See who?" I slowly raised my arm and pointed. It was the woman, or whatever it was, that stared back at me through the skylight on the roof of the RV. "Oh my God," Mia squeaked. I could see now that the pale-faced woman was tall, a few inches taller than the mannequins. As I pointed, she stared back at me with that terrible grin. "What do we do?" Mia whispered. I raised the flashlight and pointed it right at the pale-faced woman. I thought maybe this would scare her off. I was wrong. The light only made her appear more unsettling as she stared back unflinchingly. "What do you want?" I yelled. She only stared back at me. She was as still as the mannequins. "We have to keep going," I whispered. Mia didn't respond. Her body was tense as she held onto me. "We've come this far. We can't turn back again," I continued. I pulled Mia's hand and we continued on our way through the mannequins, keeping the distance between us and her as wide as possible. As we moved past, she kept watching us. Though her movements were imperceptible to us, her eyes never left us, like one of those portraits whose eyes appear to watch you no matter where you stand. Finally, we got far enough that she was out of sight, but the thought of her being somewhere behind us only unsettled me further, and I quickened our pace. As the hours wore on, there was no sign of the pale-faced woman, and the crowd of mannequins began to thin out. They still populated the tunnel from one end to the other, but there was more space between them, allowing Mia and I to walk more freely. The mannequins on the maintenance walkway on the side of the tunnel seemed to thin out as well, and I decided it would give us a better vantage if we were walking up there. I helped Mia climb up the railing that bordered the walkway, then I climbed up behind her. The walkway was elevated 3 or 4 feet above the roadway. We could easily see over the heads of the mannequins in both directions. There was, of course, no end to the tunnel in sight. We kept walking. The mannequins continued to thin out, but they were different now. They were mannequins dressed as maintenance workers again, but also mannequins dressed as families and businessmen. There was even a group of mannequin nuns standing in a single file line, heads bowed in prayer. Needless to say, we passed none of this on the way into the tunnel. I was feeling very hopeless that we were going to be able to find our way out. I was far beyond speculating how this was at all possible. It's not possible. And even if it were, there is no good reason for someone to do this to us. The only explanation was the supernatural. Then I saw her. Rather, I saw them. A Arranged in the middle of the tunnel was a circle of mannequins with long black hair and tattered cloth. They looked exactly like the pale-faced woman, minus any facial features. I kept a close watch on them as we passed to make sure they didn't start following us. "A door," Mia shouted. Mia pointed a few paces ahead of her. There was a door leading into the wall of the tunnel. We ran towards it. Mia grabbed the handle, turned it and pulled. It was heavy and Mia had to brace her foot on the wall to get it moving. The metal door groaned as if it hadn't been opened in years. Finally, it was open enough to see past. It was a hallway. It went out about 5 yards, then turned right at a 90-degree angle. The strangest part was the design of the hallway. It wasn't cement or pavement like the tunnel. The walls were wood paneled and the floor was covered in a thick carpet, like a house from the 1970s. "I say we see where this takes us," Mia said. There was no reason to disagree, but I wasn't going to get us trapped in there. I opened up my backpack and took out a water bottle. I opened it and handed it to Mia. She drank half, then I drank the other half. I slowly closed the door, shoving the empty water bottle in the crack to keep it from closing all the way. I turned to Mia. "Okay, let's go." We slowly made our way down the quiet hallway. We got down to where the hallway cornered to the right, and that's when we heard it. Ka-chunk. I whipped around. The door had closed behind us. I ran back to it and tried to push it open, but it was no use. There was no way it closed on its own. Someone had to have removed the water bottle. Our path had been chosen for us. There was no turning back. We continued down the hallway. We turned right. The hallway continued, then turned right again. That should have led us right back to the tunnel, but it didn't. This part of the hallway went on far longer than was possible without running into the tunnel. Then it turned right again. It went on like this. Sometimes a section of the hallway was 20 feet long, sometimes it was 20 yards long, sometimes it was 3 feet long, but it always turned to the right. At first it was a relief to be somewhere other than the cold, dark tunnel, but the hallway very quickly became claustrophobic, and before too long, I heard someone walking behind us. We had stopped to take a break and I heard a third pair of footsteps on the carpet coming from behind us. I backtracked to the last corner. I was terrified as I slowly peeked around the corner, tense and waiting to see the vacuous eyes and inky black hair of the pale-faced woman. But there was nothing there. I wasn't about to backtrack any further. "There was no one there," I whispered. Mia slumped against the wall and slid down to the carpet. "I think I need to rest," she said. I put my backpack down on the ground for Mia to use as a pillow. She laid her head down and was passed out in seconds. I had no idea how long we had been walking at this point. I stood leaning against the wall. My body was telling me to rest, but I couldn't risk falling asleep. I had to keep watch. I knew she was following us. I took in the details of the hallway for the first time. The carpet was a dull brown and the walls a cheap wood paneling. The hanging lighting fixtures were shaded by stained glass, something you might see in an old diner. Who built this place? Did someone pick out the carpet and the lighting fixtures? Did a team of workers blast these tunnels into the earth? Or has this place always existed? Was this purgatory? I began to feel dizzy. I was panicking. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I slumped to the floor and tried to slow my breathing. I closed my eyes. I shot up in a panic. I had fallen asleep while I was meant to be keeping watch. I snapped to my feet and looked around. Mia was still asleep on my backpack. Then I noticed that the hallway had changed. A few paces away there was now a plain wooden door in the wall. I slowly approached it. I put my ear to the door and I could hear what sounded like TV static and the low murmur of voices. I discreetly grabbed the door handle and turned it slowly. I felt the latch bolt clear and I carefully cracked the door just enough to peek inside. It was dark, so it took a second for me to register what I was seeing. I saw a small boardroom. A long table in the center was surrounded by seated men in suits. At the end of the table stood another man next to an old CRT TV that was playing static. This was the only source of light in the room, and all the men around the table were turned towards the TV. Suddenly, the screen flickered from static to a solid dark background, and some warped new age style music began playing. Then the words appeared on the screen that terrified me like nothing else before. In plain text, the words read dash, "You will lose her." I froze as I knew these words were meant for me. I watched with terror as the men seated around the table slowly turned toward me in unison. They were mannequins. The TV screen then clicked off and they continued staring at me as I could barely make out their forms through the near pitch darkness. I quickly pulled the door shut and whipped around to look at Mia. I had a horrible feeling of dread that when I turned around she would be gone, like the message on the TV promised. "Eric, what are you doing?" Mia was leaning up and staring at me. Thank God. There was Mia, right where I left her. I pointed at the door and said, "This door appeared and I "What door?" she interrupted. I turned and sure enough, the door was now gone. I explained what happened to her, but I left out the message that appeared on the screen. "You will lose her." Those words still burned in my brain. I tried to force them out. We drank water, ate granola, and then got moving again. Hallways, endless hallways. After a couple hours of walking, we started to hear music. There were small speakers in the corners of the ceiling. I recognized it as the same new age music that played on the TV in the boardroom. The melody drilled into our minds. Combined with the dull aesthetics of the quiet hallways and the endless right turns, the music had a hypnotizing effect. The lengths of the halls became more uniform. That is to say, the straight section of hallway was about 7 paces, then a right turn, then 7 paces and a right turn. "I think we're walking in circles or a square," Mia said. I looked at her and took out a bottle of water. I peeled off the plastic label and dropped it on the floor. Then we kept walking. 7 paces right turn, 7 paces right turn, 7 paces right turn. And there it was. Mia was right. The label for my water bottle lay in the middle of the hallway. Somehow we had been led into a loop. I lost it. I kicked the wall repeatedly and screamed. Mia just leaned her back against the wall. This was our dynamic. If one of us lost it, the other became zen and thought of a solution. More often than not, I was the one to lose it. I finally stopped freaking out. "There has to be a way out, a door," Mia said. "We would have seen it," I replied. "A hidden door," she said. She turned around and ran her hands along the cracks of the wood paneling. "Most likely on the outer wall," she said. She beat her fist on the wall, listening for a change in the sound. I exhaled heavily, sweating and tired, and I started searching the wall as well. We checked the whole first wall, nothing. We checked the second wall, nothing. The third, nothing. The final wall, nothing. I gave up and slumped on the floor. Mia immediately went over to the other side of the hall and started checking the inner wall. "What are you doing? I thought you said it would be on the outer wall," I asked. Then we heard it. Mia beat the wall, and instead of the dead thud, we heard a resonate boom. A door. I shot up and started tapping the wall with Mia until we found where the door ended. It was the width of about 4 wooden panels. I lined myself up in the center, lowered my shoulder, and pushed. It moved. It barely moved, but it was enough to confirm this actually was a door. I recentered and tried again, lowering my center of gravity. I pushed as hard as I could. The door pushed inward about 3 inches, then Mia joined in. We slowly moved the door, 5 inches, then 10, then 15, then 20. Then Mia slipped inside. I had a moment of panic as she disappeared into the darkness, and those haunting words came back into my mind, "You will lose her." I darted past the doorway, falling through the threshold and hitting the concrete floor. I looked up and there was Mia, thank God. I promised myself I'd never let her out of my sight again. "The exit," Mia said. She looked and sounded as if she were 1,000 miles away. I got to my feet and followed her gaze. What I saw nearly brought me to tears. We were back in the tunnel, but there was light. About a mile down was the mouth of the tunnel, and daylight pouring in. Beautiful daylight. I grabbed Mia tight and kissed her. "Thank God," she cried. We started moving. Nothing was going to slow us down this time. We sped up into a run down the maintenance walkway towards that beautiful sunlight. As we approached, something else came into view. Parked in the middle of the roadway was a large vehicle. It couldn't be. It was. Our RV sat in the road waiting for us. We ran all the way to it, pulled open the passenger side door, and climbed in. There were no mannequins to be seen. I fell into the driver's seat and Mia handed me the keys. I turned over the engine, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I shifted into gear and floored it towards the sunlight. As we got closer, I could see the green of trees and the blue of the sky. We were maybe 100 yards away. I turned to Mia, tears in my eyes. And what I saw turned my blood to ice. Just beyond Mia's window, that horrifying pale face grinned at me. The pale-faced woman was somehow floating outside of the RV. Before I could say anything, her hand smashed through the window and gripped Mia by the throat. Then in one horrible motion, the thing pulled Mia screaming through the window and disappeared. I slammed on the brakes just as the RV passed through the exit of the tunnel and sunlight flooded the cab of the RV. I threw it in park and shot out of the door screaming, "Mia, Mia." I screamed over and over. I rounded the front of the RV and looked back at the tunnel, and what I saw shattered my mind. The tunnel was gone. There was only open road. I had lost her. A few weeks ago, I rented a cabin near Pitkin County, Colorado for a weekend getaway with my wife and daughter. For their privacy, I'll refer to my wife as Elena, and my daughter, who's between 4 and 8 years old, as Sophia. It was dusk by the time we arrived at the cabin, far later than Elena and I had planned. The afternoon's anticipation gone, the promise of a relaxing vacation already sullied, and my back sore from changing the tire which had been eviscerated by the forest road. The mood was thoroughly ruined. Maybe that should have been an indication as to how the rest of the trip would go. The cabin itself was beautiful and rustic. Nestled among the towering pines, the two-story building blended into the surrounding woodlands with its dark-stained wooden siding and stone chimney. Large windows glistened with the last light of day, and the wrap-around porch boasted a hanging patio swing. Much to Sophia's delight, she ran straight for it and started swinging as Elena and I carried the bags inside. When I unlocked the door and turned on the lights, I found myself surprised by the decor. In stark contrast to the classy, almost minimalist exterior of the cabin, the interior was remarkably cluttered. It was like every square surface, countertops, bookshelves, tables, etc., was covered in little trinkets, tchotchkes as my mother would have called them. There were coasters, candles, vintage oil lamps and compasses, and a bunch of wooden animal carvings, each about a foot tall. The interior wasn't dirty by any means, just more crowded than expected. I found it charming in a weird way, though Elena was less fond. I remember her taking a long look at the place and saying, "Interesting," which is her code for, "I don't like what I'm seeing, but I also don't want to make a big deal about it." It was past Sophia's bedtime, so after coaxing her off of the porch swing, I helped her get set up for the night. There were 2 bedrooms on the second floor, a master suite with an attached bathroom, and a smaller bedroom that was pretty clearly set up as a kid's room for visitors to the cabin. The cabin was specifically advertised as family-friendly and good for parents with younger children, so it was no surprise when the smaller bedroom was full of colorful toys and plushies. There was a fireplace across from the bed, its mantel showcasing a full set of those wooden animal carvings, 1 moose, 1 bear, 1 trout, and so on. There was also 1 particularly large teddy bear sitting on the bed, partially buried under the covers like it was getting ready for bed. Sophia instantly fell in love, and I thought it was sweet that the cabin's owner had gone the extra mile to make the place welcoming. I didn't love the idea of her cuddling it to sleep though, since it likely hadn't been washed between visits, so I propped it up on a chair next to the bed before tucking Sophia in for the night. Tired from our travels, Elena and I went to sleep not too long afterwards. Saturday was our designated lake day. After making breakfast and waking up Sophia, who had to be convinced not to take her new best friend Mr. Bear out on the water with us, we grabbed the kayaks off of our roof rack and headed down to the shore. We were a short walk from the lake, and I was absolutely blown away by the natural splendor. Our cabin was semi-isolated, remote enough to give my family peace and privacy, but close enough to civilization that we could easily access help in case of an emergency. We were a 5-minute drive into town and a 5-minute walk to the nearest neighboring cabin, which we passed on the way to the lake. It was a gorgeous building, far more intricate and seemingly much older than the one we were renting. There was an older woman sitting on the porch as we passed it by, and although I couldn't wave since both hands were full with the kayaks, I gave her a nod and a friendly smile. She stared at me in response, her expression completely blank. She was looking directly at me, but almost looked like she was in a trance or something. "What was that all about?" I quietly asked Elena once we were out of earshot. "Not sure," my wife answered. "She looks pretty settled in there. Maybe that's her home and she doesn't appreciate her neighbor running an Airbnb." That seemed a logical explanation. I stole a quick glance over my shoulder before the house completely disappeared behind us, and saw that the woman was now walking down the steps of her front porch, her gaze still fixed on us. Elena and I exchanged worried looks and picked up the pace a little, Sophia running along ahead of us, joyful and oblivious. Once we reached the shore, we hopped into the kayaks and pushed off into the water. We weren't exactly running away from the woman, it was more so that we wanted to avoid a confrontation if we could. As we started paddling out into the lake, the woman appeared at the tree line but never came any closer. I gave her a wave, and again, she gave me no response but a glower. It occurred to me that she might have been trying to warn us about the lake, maybe about a current or algal bloom, but I'd researched the area extensively to make sure it was safe, and her demeanor wasn't quite urgent or benevolent enough for that to be the case. The rest of the day was thankfully devoid of any more strange encounters. After a calm day of swimming and hiking, we returned to the cabin in the evening for dinner and s'mores. Sophia brought Mr. Bear outside to help with the s'mores, to mine and Elena's amusement. We had no idea how we would convince her to leave the stuffed animal behind when we left on Monday night. After we put Sophia to sleep at 8 p.m., Elena and I watched a movie, had a drink, and then went to sleep at 10:30 or so. At midnight, according to my phone clock, I heard what sounded like a knock. I sat up in bed, checked the time, and listened for a minute. A few seconds passed, and then there came 3 knocks in quick succession. I gently shook Elena awake, waiting to hear the sound again, and after a moment I did. There was someone at the front door of the cabin in the middle of the night. Concerned, I got out of bed and tried to look out the bedroom window. I could only see a sliver of the front porch, and though I couldn't see an actual person, I could see the shadow of one thanks to the porch lights. Needless to say, I wasn't thrilled to have a stranger pay our isolated cabin a midnight visit. I told Elena to stay upstairs and made my way to the first floor, stopping by the living room to pull back the curtains ever so slightly and peer through the window. Still, given the shape of the house and the placement of the windows, it was impossible to see anything but a shadow. The person must have been standing an inch away from the front door. I scanned the front yard and the distant tree line, but didn't see anyone else, so a decoy ambush situation seemed unlikely, but I still grabbed my handgun just in case. Just my luck, the old front door of the house didn't have a peephole, so I got up close to the door and tried talking to the person on the other end. "Can I help you?" I said. Instead of answering, the person knocked again, this time more urgently. No way in hell was I opening that door now. "Look, friend, if you need help you better speak up, otherwise I'm gonna have to ask you to get off my porch before I call the police." The knocking stopped, and after a moment, there was a woman's voice on the other side of the door. Her tone was nervous and her voice was soft. She said a single sentence: "He's watching your daughter through the bear." Of all the things I expected to hear from our unwelcome visitor, that was not one of them. I readied my gun and cracked the door open. When I looked out into the night, I saw the elderly woman from earlier quickly shambling away from my door. Her back was turned towards me, and she looked like she was trying to get away from my porch as quickly as she could. I called after her, asking her what she was talking about, but she didn't look back. She just kept going until the night swallowed her up completely. I was pretty disturbed at this point, so I shut and locked the door and made my way back upstairs. Elena was waiting for me at the top of the stairs, and I quietly explained to her what was going on. Horrified, she went into Sophia's room and gently took the teddy bear out of our sleeping daughter's arms. We went downstairs and laid the bear out on the kitchen counter. I grabbed a pair of kitchen shears and dissected the thing, making an incision in its fluffy body and pulling out its cotton innards. It wasn't that I believed the old woman, just that as a parent, anything related to my kid's safety, even something that sounds outlandish, is something I take seriously. Even though the woman was likely suffering from some kind of cognitive impairment, I still wanted to investigate. I pulled all the stuffing out of Mr. Bear and found nothing, though Elena pointed out that the bear had 2 very large glass eyes which could potentially be concealing a small camera. I was unable to find a hammer, but I did find a wrench under the kitchen sink. I wrapped the eyes in a kitchen towel and smashed them to bits, but when I sorted through the fragments, I didn't see anything that looked like a recording device. I was relieved, but I was also equal parts creeped out and angry. Maybe, like Elena had mentioned earlier, she was annoyed with the constant visitors to her neighboring cabin and was trying to scare us off. She might also have had some mental health issues or hallucinations. In either case though, how did she know about the teddy bear? Maybe she had visited the house before, or maybe it was just a lucky guess. Before returning to bed, I took a turn around both floors of the cabin, looking and failing to find anything out of the ordinary. Elena was also pretty freaked out, and she got up several times in the night to visit Sophia's room down the hall and make sure all was well. Needless to say, neither of us got much sleep that night. Sunday morning was all doom and gloom, which ended up being a perfect reflection of my daughter's attitude when she woke up and realized Mr. Bear was gone. Obviously, we didn't tell her what had happened, but Elena and I did our best to distract her with flapjacks and promises of a fun day of adventuring. Unfortunately, the hike we had planned was foiled by a downpour that, of course, the forecast hadn't predicted, and so we decided to salvage the day by exploring the small town nearby. It wouldn't be the escape into nature we'd hoped for, but there were several family-owned restaurants and shops in the area, as well as a small library. The morning was alright. I enjoyed exploring the little town with my family, although there wasn't much to do. We had an early lunch at around 11 or so, but when we sat down, my wife started rifling through her backpack with a look of dismay. When I asked asked her what was wrong, she said that she didn't see Sophia's EpiPen, which we always like to have at the ready when we eat out. I realized immediately that I'd forgotten to put it back in Elena's backpack yesterday when I was reorganizing our stuff. I felt like such an idiot, and Elena, already grouchy from a sleepless night, really chewed me out for it. To make amends, I told her to wait with Sophia at the restaurant while I hurried back to the cabin for the EpiPen. She was displeased, but it felt like a better option than all of us braving the rain to return to the cabin. The drive back was an absolute nightmare. Sure, it was a short commute, but the dirt roads leading up to the cabin had turned to sludge in the heavy rain. I was in a foul mood when I entered the cabin. I shut the front door with a slam and made my way to the stairs. The house was dark thanks to the storm outside, dark enough that I almost missed the muddy shoe prints leading up the hardwood steps. When I saw them and realized what they were, I stopped in my tracks. I didn't have to wonder what they meant. Someone had been in the cabin since my family left, and judging by the fact that there was only one set of prints, they likely were still in the house with me at that very moment. I stood on the half landing looking up at the second half of the staircase. The upper floor was eerily dark, so much so that someone could have been standing right at the edge of the staircase and I wouldn't have been able to see them. I carefully walked backwards down the stairs, keeping my eyes peeled in case any shape suddenly emerged from the darkness. And once I made it down the stairs, I turned around and ran outside. I sat in my car and called the police to report a break-in. After calling Elena to explain the situation, I sat in my car and watched the house until the police arrived, which took almost an unreasonable amount of time. I never saw any movement from inside the house, nor did I see anyone leave, though I didn't have a great visual on the back door. It's possible that the intruder could have slipped through the back and run straight for the woods, in which case the cabin would have obscured them. The police were shockingly curt and dismissive about the whole thing. One of the officers who arrived on scene asked me for proof of a break-in, as if I would have had time to snap a picture of the intruder in my house or something. They did a sweep of the cabin and found no one inside, but even so, I didn't want my wife and daughter to set foot in that building again. I texted Elena, telling her I was going to pack up our stuff and that we should leave a night early, and she agreed. The cops stayed with me as I packed to give me some peace of mind, which I appreciated. Aside from the shoe prints, there weren't any obvious signs of a break-in, and strangely, nothing of value had been stolen, even though I'd left my laptop laying out in plain sight. Thankfully, we'd packed light, so it didn't take me long to grab all of our stuff from the master bedroom and the bathrooms. My last stop was Sophia's room, where I was quickly able to locate and pack all of her things. Nothing of Sophia's had been stolen or tampered with, but there was something missing from the fireplace mantle. Right in the center there was a circular impression in the fine layer of dust, indicating that a certain figurine had recently been separated from its wooden brethren. Someone had taken the bear. It had been raining for most of the day. Yesterday's forecast was for a light shower, but this was torrential. I peeked out the window, and in the darkness of the late afternoon, I could see a river of rainwater cascading down either side of the street. My parents were getting worried about my sister. Emily had spent the day at a friend's house and was supposed to be back an hour ago. Just as my dad was about to get in his car and go for a drive around the block to find her, the front door opened. Emily walked in dressed in her yellow raincoat. Much to my parents' chagrin, she was holding onto the worn collar of an old soaking wet dog. The thing was a mongrel, but I could make out the Alsatian in it, maybe some golden retriever. As I tried to work it out, I made a mental note to put dog breeder down on my list of career interests for school. My parents exchanged apprehensive glances as Emily smiled awkwardly and explained how she found him shivering in the rain on the side of the road. There was something about its eyes, she said, that made her instantly feel sorry for the poor guy. My dad knelt by the dog and had a look at its collar. It was battered, its red color fading, and it had no name, phone number, or address written on it. My father stood up with a sigh and told Emily that he'd bring the mutt to the vet on Thursday to see if it had been chipped, and for the 5 days until then, looking after it would be her responsibility. Emily beamed at my dad and took the dog into the kitchen to towel it down. Later on that evening, she brought it back into the living room and informed us that his name was Buster. My father warned against getting too attached, but she didn't listen. She spent the rest of the day playing with Buster and sending pictures of him to her friends. That night, Buster slept on a makeshift bed of old blankets and cardboard in the kitchen. My parents prayed that he wouldn't make a mess of the place at night. Emily hugged Buster and gave him another treat before rushing off to her room. In the morning, all was well. It looked like Buster hadn't moved an inch. The dopey guy barely looked up at us when we crowded into the kitchen for breakfast. Immediately, Emily knelt beside him, rubbing his tummy and stroking his fur. I think Emily was too afraid of taking Buster for a walk, just in case she bumped into his owners and they dragged him away from her. The garden had been turned to mud the day before, and there wasn't a chance in hell that my mother would let that dog back in the house if he had a trace of muck on his paws. So he, like the rest of us, spent that day cooped up inside. Not that he seemed to mind. My dad cooked up a lamb chop for Buster that night at Emily's request. It was the most animated I've seen him. His eyes lit up as it was placed in front of him, and we all erupted into laughter as he tore into it. That night, I jolted awake. The radio alarm clock on my bedside cabinet informed me in analog red light that it was 4:37. I lay there, but quickly began to fall back to sleep. As I could have sworn I heard something moving around in the hallway. I assumed it was my dad stumbling to the bathroom in a drunken stupor, and for the second time that night, sleep took me. I spent most of the next day hanging out with friends around town. We rode our bikes, threw stones at the windows of the old house on Mill Street, and dared each other to shoplift from the local off-brand gas station. I made off with a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum. When I came home, things felt different, hostile. I didn't want to ask what happened, but before I could slink off to my room, my mother told me Emily had accidentally knocked over my grandfather's urn while playing with Buster in the front room. I suppressed a chuckle at the thought of how much trouble she'd be getting in. Mature of me, I know. That evening there was silence around the dinner table, broken only by Buster's whining. I woke up again that night. This time I swung myself out of bed. My mouth was dry and my breath left a stale taste at the back of my throat. I wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I tried to be as silent as possible, not wanting to disturb the sleeping dog. Buster slept soundly in his little bed, and I knew a freight train going past wouldn't wake him. I poured a glass of water and drank it in a continuous gulp. Then an idea came to me. I crouched by the cabinet my dad kept his whiskey in. I opened it, trying not to let the hinges creak. I picked out a bottle and stood up. I gently unscrewed the cap and took a sip. I coughed and choked and spluttered. As I went for another sip, I heard movement upstairs. I knew my father would kill me if he caught me drinking. I hastily put the cap back on and placed it back in the cupboard. I speed walked out the kitchen, desperate not to make a noise. Just before I began ascending the stairs, I heard the door to my parents' room open. I quickly turned around and hid in the living room. I heard my father walk down the stairs and into the kitchen. My heart was beating like a tribal drum as I hurried out of the living room, and I stepped agonizingly loudly up each creaky step back to my bedroom. I thought I had made it, but just as I was pushing my bedroom door open, I heard a voice behind me. It was my father. He'd popped his head out of his bedroom. He asked if it was me moving around. I told him that I'd just gone downstairs to get a glass of water. He told me to keep it down, and before he retreated back into the darkness of his room, I saw my mother stirring in the bed behind him. He closed the door. That morning I woke up with a migraine. Nothing too major, but it was a drawback from what would have otherwise been a great day. My sister was at some dance club, my mother was visiting the solicitor in town, and my father had gone golfing. On this rare occasion, I had the house to myself. Well, me and the dog. I found a strongly worded note on the kitchen table when I woke up. It was left by Emily, telling me how I should feed and entertain Buster while she was gone. I crumpled it up and attempted to throw it into the bin from across the room, missing horribly. I made myself the unhealthiest breakfast I could think of. I took it into the living room to eat while I settled down to watch a film, Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. That's how I spent the morning. Later on, I took my empty plate into the kitchen. I figured if my mother saw that I cleaned the dishes, she wouldn't be as critical when she found the crumbs. I walked past Buster, who was slumped in his usual stop in the corner of the room on a bed of now dirty sheets. In a joking manner, I asked him how his day was while I washed up. Obviously, I got no reply. I remembered my sister's note and set a half-dried glass down while I fetched Buster some treats. I didn't know where Emily kept them, so I grabbed a slice of overly processed ham from the fridge. I crouched beside him and dangled it in front of his snout, teasing him. There was no response, no slow opening of the eyelids, no methodic wag of the tail. There were no signs of life at all. I gasped and put my hand on his stomach, trying to feel it rise with his breath or a heartbeat, anything. To my horror, his abdomen began to compress when I did, like a limp, deflating balloon. He felt hollow, empty. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled backwards. As I put my hand on the counter, I knocked over a glass. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but Buster didn't so much as flinch. I panicked and ran up to my room. I took my phone from my bedside cabinet and hastily rang my mother. It rang for a brief moment before she picked up. I managed to stutter out that there was something wrong with the dog, that it was an emergency. She assured me that she had just picked up Emily and would be home in 10 minutes, and with that she hung up. I set my phone down and paced around the room. As I was thinking, I heard a noise coming from the first floor. It sounded like someone moving around. I assumed it was my mother, home earlier than she estimated. I made my way downstairs to greet her, hurrying over the creaking steps. There was no one. The door was still locked and I, as far as I knew, was alone in the house. I heard the now familiar wag of Buster's tail as he came bounding up to me from the hall. I looked at him puzzled as he nestled his head into my leg. I stroked him behind the ears as he mewed low. I then heard the equally familiar jangling of keys as the front door was unlocked. My mother stepped inside, pumping her umbrella. Emily, who was close beside her, ran to Buster and dropped to her knees as soon as she saw him. She hugged him tight and whispered in his flea-bitten ear. I could see her eyes were red, raw from crying. My mother asked me what the big emergency was, and I paused before answering. I explained that he had been unresponsive, but he seems fine now. My mother let out a long, drawn-out sigh as she made her way past us and into the kitchen. She called my name, frustrated, when she saw the broken shards of glass on the kitchen floor. I had forgotten about that. Emily spent the rest of the day in her room with the dog. At dinner, neither me or my mother mentioned anything about Buster's false alarm. We just let my dad witter on about improving his backswing, whatever that meant. For the third night in a row, I jolted awake in the small hours of the morning. I groaned at the abrupt ending of a good dream, tossing and turning until I found a comfy position. As I tried to get back to sleep, I began to feel a presence. It was the feeling you get during an awkward silence when you become painfully aware of the other person. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, trying to adjust them to the darkness. There was someone in the corner of my room. I was certain of it. I could make out the vague shadow-covered silhouette standing just beyond the foot of my bed. I was almost paralyzed with fear, but my right hand managed to creep over to my bedside cabinet. I fumbled as I felt for the familiar switch of the lamp. Just before I turned it on, the figure in my room bolted. I recoiled in shock as I realized my half-asleep mind had been right. Someone had been standing there watching. As the moon emerged from a bank of clouds, my room was briefly lit with a dull glow. In that half-light, I saw the outline of a tall man slink out of my room and into the darkness of the hall. I didn't realize I was screaming until my father burst into my room moments later. He switched the lights on, which burned my eyes. He held me and asked what was wrong. With snot and tears dripping down my face, I managed to stutter out that there had been someone in my room. At this, my dad turned and ran back into his room. His caring embrace was quickly replaced with my mother's. He emerged with a baseball bat in his hands, gasping it so hard his knuckles were white. My mother went to check on Emily. She made me come with her, not waiting to let her children out of her sight. Me barged into Emily's room. She was already awake, sitting upright in bed. My mother fired a barrage of questions at her. Dazed, Emily told us that she hadn't seen anything. My father came into the room 10 minutes later. He informed us that he did a sweep of the house and found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no mysterious intruder. He brought me back to my room. Once I was in bed, he sat by my side and explained to me that I probably just had a bad dream. He said there was nothing to be afraid of and joked that if someone did break into the house, they'd soon be scared off by Buster, the world's greatest guard dog. Eventually, I mustered the courage to fall back asleep. The next morning, everyone in the family was noticeably tired, even the dog. We greeted each other with yawns and joked about the previous night's events. I didn't know that this was the start of the last truly happy day of my life. My parents went out shopping, Emily took Buster for his first proper walk, and I spent most of the day gaming. It was a normal day. I've had dozens just like it. We had chicken breasts and bland steamed vegetables for dinner. Wednesday was family night, so after dinner we came together in the living room to play a board game. Tonight it was Cluedo. Buster was curled up at Emily's feet. My father thought then was a good time to remind her that tomorrow he was bringing the dog to the vet and would hopefully reunite him with his real owners. At this, Emily screamed that she was his real owner. She stormed out of the room, Buster following close behind. As soon as she slammed the door behind her, my dad signed. He said he knew my sister would get too attached to that dog. This was the sour note the day ended on. At 10, I did my usual routine. I brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, and listened to music for half an hour or so before turning over and going to sleep. As I expected, I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time I was too afraid to move, too afraid to open my eyes and see what could be lurking in my room. Instead, I kept them tightly shut and tried desperately to go back to sleep. After laying in bed for what felt like hours but must have only been 20 minutes, I decided to open my eyes. I was filled with a directionless dread as I slowly peeped out over my duvet. Since I had woken up, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. As I pulled the covers away from my face, I saw who had been staring at me. My bedroom door was wide open, and sitting perfectly still in the doorway was Buster. His head was craned slightly and looking directly at me. I chuckled to myself, realizing that I had been terrified over nothing. I swung my legs out of bed and got up. I took Buster by the collar and began to lead him back downstairs to his bed. As I walked down the hall, I noticed that the door to my sister's room was ajar. I brought Buster into the kitchen and watched as he laid down on the crumpled mess of cardboard and old blankets that he slept on. I smiled as he slumped his head onto his paws and closed his dreary eyes. I wouldn't exactly call him my best friend, but I'd miss him after tomorrow. I turned to leave, to crawl back into bed and finally get some rest, but something caught my eye from out of the kitchen window. I leaned against the sill and looked out onto the cold night. The moon was a perfect crescent, half hidden by the clouds. Light pollution from the nearby city robbed the sky of stars, but as I stared into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shooting star. As I gazed in awe to see if I could see another one, I saw someone. There was a person leaning against the fence along our front driveway. I quickly realized it was Emily. I could make much out in the darkness, but I could see that she looked nervous. I was about to open the window and call out to her when I heard something behind me. I turned around and realized it was coming from the dog. I assumed he had yelped in his sleep, maybe stuck in some bad dream, but then I noticed something else. His skin was moving. Rather, there was something moving around just under the surface of his skin. I didn't have time to think what it could be before I saw the long crimson red fingers protrude from his stomach. They grabbed onto either side of the now gaping wound and parted his abdomen like curtains. Once the opening was wide enough, the unnaturally long arm reached out, snaking across the kitchen floor until it grabbed the dining table's leg. It held onto it tightly as it began to pull the rest of it out. I couldn't comprehend how something so large could have fit inside of that animalistic facade. Eventually, it was fully out and stood upright. The figure must have been at least 3 meters tall. It was hunched over where it met the ceiling. It looked like it had been skinned. Its lanky body was made up of exposed sinew and muscle. The thing's eyes were milk white and bulging out of its vaguely dog-shaped head. It was grotesque. With a streak of urine running down my leg, I turned around and ran as fast as I could upstairs. I burst into my parents' bedroom and stood in front of their bed, screaming and wailing about some monster. They were both shaken awake at my outpour of terror. My father was calm at first. He tried to sit me down and tell me that it had all been a bad dream, like the night before. I pushed him away and tried to articulate between screams that there was a monster downstairs and we had to leave. My father quickly became furious. His anger at me was only amplified by his tiredness. He grabbed my shaking hand and began to shout that at 14 I was too old for any of this. But I was hysterical, and his attempt at reasoning did nothing. As I kept on wailing, he and my mother began to half lead, half drag me back into my own room. Kicking and screaming, I fell to my bedroom floor. I jolted at the noise of the slamming of my door and got to my feet. With tears streaking down my red cheeks, I pounded the door. I heard my father's voice on the other side pleading with me to calm down. Our shouting reached a fever pitch and then silence. We both stopped and listened out for the repetition of the noise that had brought our heated argument to an end. The dull thudding noise came again, this time accompanied by a shrill creak. I realized it was the sound of something climbing the stairs. I took a tentative step back as the noise drew closer and closer. In a weak voice, I heard my father stutter, What are you?" I knew what he had seen. I've spent the last 11 years blocking out the memory of what came next. There was screaming and pleading, the sound of flesh ripping and bone shattering. I sat motionless on the carpet of my bedroom floor as viscose blood began seeping in from under the door. The sounds or carnage stopped and I held my breath as there was perfect silence once again. This silence was broken by the sound of my door slowly creaking open. I was petrified with fear. I could do anything. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. The thing opened my door a crack before stopping. The slowly thudding noise returned as it walked away from the scene until I couldn't hear anything more. I stayed welded to the spot for a minute or two before grief hit me like a bus. I began crying until my eyes were raw. I stood up and took my phone from my bedside cabinet. I dialed 911 and desperately tried to explain what had happened. I glanced out of my window and my jaw went slack. Walking down the middle of our street was the creature, caked in blood the same shade as its taut skin. Holding its hand and walking next to it it was Emily. She stared up at it with affection. The two were illuminated by the street lights, and I saw that the creature was holding the fursuit that had once been Buster in the talons of its other hand. I watched as they walked down the street, across the sidewalk, and into the forest that surrounded my neighborhood. That was the last time I saw my sister. Within the hour, the police came. They cordoned off the area and took me in. I spent the next few years in foster care. The official statement they had given was that it was a kidnapping gone wrong. Only I and the officers and coroner who saw my parents' remains knew that it was something much more sinister. That was 11 years ago. Tonight, I finished writing this before I begin a journey that I should have undertaken a long time ago. Emily is still out there somewhere, and I am going to find her. It's crazy what some people will put up with for a little bit of money. Desperate times, I suppose. Well, I am one of those desperate people. Desperation to get my daughter a life-saving medical treatment is what drove me to where I am now. That same desperation has led to daily fear of what might happen next to Danny and I now that it's over. I had no choice. I needed money right away. I couldn't qualify for a loan, and the insurance company said the treatment was not authorized under our policy. My work was barely paying over minimum wage, and I still needed almost $5,000. The only way this would work is if I got another job working graveyards somewhere else, at least until I could save enough to get her the treatment. Danny was all I had left. I already lost her mother a year ago in that car crash. I couldn't lose her too. I looked high and low. I combed the classifieds and drove around desperately searching for a job that could pay what I needed and have an available night shift as well. The prospect seemed hopeless, but I had to find something soon. The town we lived in was small and the prospect seemed bleak. That was when, in a streak of what felt like luck at the time, I inquired about a job at a small grocery store about a mile away from where we live. It was called Shoe's Nighttime Convenience and Grocery. It was an odd little store that was closed during the day and seemed to open at around 8 p.m. and close sometime before morning. The weird hours seemed off, and I didn't know who would want to shop at a store that was only open in the middle of the night when there were 24-hour chains elsewhere. Though it did not really matter, it was a store, I needed a job, and the unique hours in this case would work for the schedule I needed. I decided to try and apply for a job there. I was on my way home after finishing a shift at my day job. My friend Kathy was nice enough to watch Danny while I was working and had even agreed to do so if I found a graveyard shift somewhere else as well, at least for a month or two if needed. Since I had seen the odd shop and saw the hours, I decided to inquire about a job at the lonesome and odd little store that seemed to only be open at night. I was reluctant at first since I thought they might have some illicit reasons to only be open at such hours. Despite my misgivings, I realized it was the best hope I had of getting a job with my minimal skill set, and that was a guaranteed graveyard shift. I got out of my car and walked up to the entrance. The place was pretty run down but seemed to still have signage up and around the front. There were sale signs and clearance items advertised, and the somewhat normal facade of a grocery store made me relax and continue with my intended course. I noticed up close there was a mark under the first part of the store named She's. It looked like Japanese or something. I stepped inside and it seemed deceptively large compared to how small it looked on the outside. There were aisles of various groceries and other household supplies and even some clothes racks. I had no idea how it was this large in operation. Most of the shoppers seemed fairly normal at first, though there were some people who you could tell preferred to do their shopping at night. I tried not to stare as I received a rather murderous looking glare from one such individual who I must have let my eyes linger on too long. The staff also looked about the same as any other store's staff would look, fairly diverse and no one with an overly cheery or overly sullen mood about them. I did notice there was not a lot of talking near the checkouts. Moving on, I looked near the front, intent on finding a manager's office to inquire at. I felt hopeful when I saw a sign that I thought read "Help Wanted." I felt a bit confused and less optimistic when I read the full content of the rather strange sign stating "Help Wanted," but not always needed. I was not sure how to take that, so I decided to look for someone to ask. As I approached the back office and went to knock on the door, I was interrupted by a large man with a blue store apron and a name badge indicating he was Store Manager Benny. The large man welcomed me with a pleasant though slightly forced, "Hello, can I help you find something today?" I was distracted by the almost pained expression on his face, like his smile would eventually shatter the muscles in his face if he kept it on for a moment longer. Brushing past the distraction, I remembered why I was there. Yes, I was actually looking to apply for a job here. I stated my earnest intent while gesturing to the help sign near the door. Benny stopped smiling and looked at the sign, and then looked as as if he was about to say something when he held up a finger and pulled out a radio from his pocket. "Molly, what is the bagger situation today? How are we holding up staff-wise?" There was no immediate response. He smiled again in that disturbing way while he drummed his fingers along his tie as he awaited a response. His face wrinkled and then he stated, "I am sorry, I think we might be full at the moment, but thanks for your interest." He was about to usher me away when his radio barked to life and I heard a static-laden voice on the line. I couldn't hear everything, but it sounded strange and I thought I heard something like, "Rob caught a problem and got bagged." I didn't know what to make of the weird bits I heard, but before I could think twice about it, I heard Benny mumble, "Alright, but next time answer faster, it could have been a code black, and if you mess around with those customers, it is your butt next." I was still standing there in awkward silence when he wheeled around and his frustrated veneer vanished and he was back to the awful fake smile as he loudly proclaimed, "Congratulations, there is an opening available now, let's get you set up, can you start tonight?" "Right now, as in tonight?" I asked, thoroughly surprised they would want me to start immediately and without any application or vetting process to speak of. "Yes, right now, don't worry, we can sort out all the legal stuff later, but for tonight we are actually a bit busier than normal and we could use the help. First though, let's talk terms and some mandatory paperwork." I was not sure what he meant, but I figured it might mean a salary negotiation. "Sure, what is the pay and benefits?" I knew it was a little tacky to ask up front, but I needed that money badly and Danny couldn't afford for me to get taken for a ride by someone lowballing my wages. $45 an hour is the pay for baggers, which is what we normally start people as. I almost gasped aloud. That was crazy for a grocery store bag boy. My surprise was apparent and Benny held up a hand and cut off my next question stating, "We value hard work and integrity here and just a wee bit of discretion." He laughed aloud and slapped his knee. "But in all seriousness, there is a non-disclosure agreement we do need you to sign with the paperwork." He grinned again and I thought the discretion bit and NDA was weird, but that was double what I was making at my day job, so I was overjoyed at the prospect. He continued, "The health coverage and dental are fully covered, but no life insurance. Those policies always have some trouble for some reason." His grin widened as he said the last part, and it looked even more fake than before. Despite some disturbing implications, I could scarcely hear the alarm bells in my head over my future payday. I had found a miracle. I would be able to get enough money in about a month working here and my day job. I would be able to get Danny that treatment. I didn't need to be asked twice. I readily agreed to the offer. "Very good decision. Welcome to the Shar family. Ed, get out here and get our new hire an apron and a tag and start with the simple version of the bagger training." An unpleasant looking older man emerged from the back room and was holding an apron and moving with an odd gait that might have indicated some previous injury or the like. I forced a smile and introduced myself, but the man, Ed, as I heard his name was, did not reciprocate. He looked me up and down and snorted derisively in a way that was hard not to take offense to. I let it go and waited for him to say something. Just before opening my mouth to ask when the training started, he cut me off and humorlessly asked, "You know baggin', feller?" "Baggin', like bagging groceries?" I tried to clarify. He glared at me and just nodded his head. "Well, yeah, I mean, I have a general idea. I never worked at a grocery store before, but I think I know how things should be bagged generally speaking." He paused an uncomfortably long time and I was about to try and speak again when he snorted and gave a rather unpleasant throaty laugh that ended in a dry coughing fit. After he finished, he said, "Not like this, I'm guessing you don't. Alright then, come on, I will show you how we do the bagging and also the other rules. Reckon you better listen close, I ain't for repeating myself." I nodded my head and we started towards the back room, when I heard the radio on his belt come to life and a very nervous sounding voice on the other line say, "Code black, repeat code black." Ed's face wrinkled in a way that somehow made him look even more annoyed than usual. God screw it all, more of them fellers already. He turned and left, angrily shouting some imperceptible grunts and complaints into the walkie, and left me near the back room dumbstruck and not sure of what to do next. What was a code black? Why was everyone afraid of them? I was about to go look for someone when I felt a hand on my shoulder and I wheeled around to see a woman. The tag on her shirt read Assistant Manager Molly. She smiled at me and it did seem more genuine than some of the others here. "I'm sorry we have not met. You must be the new hire. I'm Molly, the AM here. I can help you with training and orientation. You can be a great asset here at She's." She held a hand toward the backroom doors and ushered me toward them. We moved into the backroom halls and as I looked around, I saw several doors that looked like ice boxes. I figured they must store a lot of products to need that many freezers scattered about. Visible near the freezers' doors were shelves of other inventory. There were rows of boxes and pallets of strange things like chemicals, metalworking gear, various pieces of hardware, and crates that had gun manufacturers' names on them. I was wondering again just what kind of store this really was. Besides the odd inventory, it was also kind of a mess, and I was glad I wouldn't be the one having to sort all of it. We made our way to an office room with oppressively bright blue painted walls, like a kindergarten classroom. The sight reminded me of when Danny was in kindergarten, and I steeled my resolve against any difficulty this job might have. I needed to do this for her. The office was sparse. There was only a desk, some chairs, and a file cabinet. I did notice on the walls, painted on the bright blue, were some black characters that almost looked like calligraphy. More of those kanji were on the wall, and again I wondered what they meant. Before I could guess, Molly was motioning to me. She gestured for me to sit down at one of the only two chairs, in this case the one facing the desk. I sat down and she sat opposite me. She looked over a few pieces of paper she had on a clipboard, and then smiled, turned around and started rummaging through a file cabinet. As I was waiting, a sudden shriek was heard outside, and I looked to the door and suppressed a gasp. Molly didn't react and kept looking for something. I thought maybe she hadn't heard it, and I was about to say something when she wheeled around with a large binder in hand and dropped it onto the desk with a loud crash. "Before training starts, please fill out this form for your safety and ours." She handed me a piece of paper that, when reading the details, seemed to be the non-disclosure agreement Benny had mentioned. I thought it was odd I had to sign this, but other hiring documents like tax, payroll, and healthcare paperwork were not required before starting. I considered they might be paying people under the table, which I hated to admit I might prefer, since no tax deduction meant I could save money faster. I signed all too quickly without realizing what I was agreeing to keep quiet and what the consequences imposed were if I didn't. Molly took the paper, looked it over, and said, "Good, that is settled. Well, let's get started. This is the employee handbook. We only have one, so you're going to be doing some light reading for a bit. Because we need the manpower now, though, I will go through it with you quickly, since Ed was indisposed." She grimaced when she said the last word and looked at her watch, and then adjusted a dial on her walkie-talkie. She looked back at me and resumed. "As a bagger, you are vital in ensuring customers leave satisfied with their product, and you are one of the last people they will see on the way out, except in certain circumstances." She cleared her throat loudly in time to some muffled noise I thought I heard somewhere else in the back room. "Basic rules and code of conduct are as follows. You are to bag products to the customer's satisfaction. The first thing you are to ask customers is what type of bags they want. Whatever they say goes as far as how to bag things and with what bags. You are not to ask about or discuss the purchases of the customers, no matter how curious you are or how talkative they might be. No questions, period. Understood?" She slammed her fist on the binder, and I jumped back startled as she looked at me. I stammered out a quick acknowledgement. Yes, understood." "Good," she said, and continued with the list. "No assistance may be provided to customers for loading or unloading things from their vehicles. If a customer requests help to their vehicle, do not under any circumstances assist or leave the building with them or any customer at any time, regardless of the story they give you as to why they need help. It is our policy and they know this. If requests persist, or you are feeling intimidated or threatened, you are to press the yellow button at the end of each checkout by the bagging station. A security personnel will escort the offending customer to aisle 4 for processing and detainment." Wait, detainment? They don't just kick them out? I thought that was weird. She continued with the next rule before I could ask about it. "The most important rule, occasionally there will be a special bag request. You will know it when you hear it. If ordered, press the black button by the end of the checkout and proceed with code black protocol. These guests are normally our highest paying customers and often are here at the pleasure of Mr. Shy himself. They must be attended as quickly as possible." There it was, code black again. What special bag was she talking about? Ignoring the look of concern spreading over my face, she continued. "Cell phones, smartwatches, or quite literally anything that could be used as a recording device are strictly prohibited while on duty, both for our customers' sake and for our own. Store closes at 4 a.m. exactly. Any customers who remain will be escorted out, only exception being any customers who are involved in a code black. No access is allowed to the basement and inventory back rooms, only managers and stock employees allowed. Simple, right? Any questions?" she asked while flashing another smile. Well, I did have a few questions about the... She cut me off mid-sentence, talking over me and saying, "Good, I knew you looked like a fast learner. Come on, let's get you out to the check stands and bagging." She grabbed my shoulders surprisingly hard and pulled me out of the office and back into the store proper. I saw a few customers look at me getting pulled along, and I saw some snickers and I felt a bit embarrassed. I was led to a checkout with a flickering number 3 next to it. The other two were busy with customers waiting in line to be helped by a cashier and bagger a few feet away from where I would be standing. We stopped and Molly cleared her throat loudly to get the attention of a young man with dirty blonde hair and a rather unimpressed expression on his face. "Hello, Lee, this is our new bagger. Show him the ropes and try to be easy on him. It's his first day. I know it's busy, but we don't need another Rob situation so soon. Have fun, you two." She walked away without another word to the back room, and I was left there with Lee, as I heard his name was staring at me. I tried to break the ice. "Hi, my name is..." "Save it," he responded abruptly. "I don't want to get attached just in case. I liked Rob, he was my friend, and now, well, now it's best not to talk about what happened to him. Just do your job and follow the rules and you should be fine." I didn't know how to respond to the blunt introduction, but I figured he seemed nicer than that Ed guy, so I just walked up to the bagging station and gave him a mock salute and tried to put a smile on my face. It was going to be a long night. The first customer came through and Lee wordlessly scanned their items. I proceeded to grab a few nearby bags when I felt a sharp kick in my leg. Lee was glaring at me like I had just slapped his mother. What? I thought I was supposed to. Then I looked at the customer who was frowning at me and I remembered. "Hello, what type of bag would you like?" The customer, an older woman, sneered at me and finally accepted the question and said flatly, "Paper, please," and did her best to pretend I didn't exist while I was bagging her items. Mostly groceries, produce, meat, and dairy. There were a few odd pieces, like a set of kitchen knives and what looked like boxes of some sort of firearm ammunition. I was about to ask about them when I remembered the rules. I tried to ignore it and just carry on. She left wordlessly and more customers piled into our line. As the night went on, I started to see less normal items and more disturbing things. One customer had bought zip ties, large volumes of what looked like medical grade sedatives, and several bags of candy. Another bought an ungodly amount of various weapons ammunition and several large fruits like watermelon and honeydew. I thought he might be just shooting some fruit for target practice until I saw what appeared to be a Kevlar vest and an uncomfortable amount of alcohol. After a dozen very disturbing customers came through, I finally found someone who seemed a bit friendly. She was a kindly old woman who seemed to enjoy speaking to me and by all accounts was very nice. It was a much needed reprieve and I actually enjoyed talking with her. Her name was Marge and she was just buying some baking supplies, eggs, butter, flour, spices, all pretty normal things. "You simply must try my raspberry tart, it is divine. I will bring some by next time, or better yet, I think I still have some in my car. Won't you be a doll and help an old woman with her groceries?" I was about to accept when I saw Lee's face go blank and he just shook his head. I looked back at Marge and she had a wide grin on her face, and I looked down at the second half of her groceries, yet to be bagged. There were containers of various chemicals, including rat poison, bleach, and ammonia. I tried to speak but I froze, and she asked again. "Come on, dearie, my hip is in bad shape after my fall. It will only be a moment and you can have a treat and a nice tip as well." Her grin shifted in a way that made me very uncomfortable and I struggled to speak but finally blurted out, "No thank you, ma'am, store policy. We are not to escort customers out of the store under any conditions." Her grin vanished and grimace of anger flared up briefly. "Oh well, your loss I suppose. I would have made it spectacular. I thought I might get one of the new ones before you figured it out. Next time, Sonny, I might just find where you live and make a house call." She winked at me and pushed her cart away and I was shocked and horrified at the implications of what had just happened. Lee elbowed me in the side and gestured to the customer who had taken her place, and I was forced to just ignore another uncomfortable encounter that night. After a long shift of bagging goods for an assortment of disturbing individuals, I realized my work was done when a screeching PA system informed everyone in the store that It is now 4 a.m. and we are closing. If you have not purchased your items already, then you must leave. If you are loading goods, a reminder that no employees may leave with you. You must take them and leave. If you do not, they will be confiscated. Any customers lingering in store will be confiscated as well. Jeez, they were not joking about the strict closing time. A large group of people I had not seen before moved through the aisles with flashlights and batons. They must have been the store's security team. They seemed overkill and intense, more like paramilitary than grocery store security guards. They were looking for any stragglers apparently. I thought just then of the weird announcement about people left behind being confiscated as well, and it seemed kind of concerning with how serious they were about everyone getting the hell out on time. I was ushered out as well, along with the other staff who left wordlessly. I tried to make a quip to Lee, asking if there was ever overtime, but he just kept his head down and ignored my joke. I did not know what kind of operation this was, but the more I learned about it, the more I felt like I made a mistake in taking the job. I had to keep it for a while longer at least until I could save enough for Danny's treatment. I worked at Schur's for a few more weeks of uncomfortable conversations and ghoulish and unspeakable items being bagged at the caprice of disturbing and malign customers. I saw 2 code blacks in that time, at least I should say I overheard them. Lee told me not to look and try to avoid the attention of the customers who ordered them. After the first one in my second week of work, I did not see Jay the other bag boy again. Lee warned me not to ask about him, and I was getting increasingly terrified of what would happen if I got one as well. What the hell were the code blacks? The only good news I had was that the store paid bi-weekly, and to my surprise, it seemed like almost no taxes were taken out of my paycheck. I had almost a full $2,800 from the first 2 weeks of work. A little more, and with a bit of the money I saved up from my other job, I could afford Danny's treatment. I just needed to make it 2 more weeks, and then I could quit and never see the awful place again. I managed to avoid any trouble for my 3rd week, but in my last week I had a disastrous run-in with a customer. It was what started a sequence of events so horrible that the conclusion still threatens my family's safety and terrifies me to this day. It was about 11 p.m. and things were going okay. Some of the managers were poking around and there was an odd air of concern and anticipation in the air. Lee told me that the owner would be stopping by at some point that night, Mr. Shaw himself. I was trying to ask more about the owner when a large bald man came to our checkout. He had horn-rimmed glasses and a large jowly face that was fixed in a leering stare that made me feel very uncomfortable. He tried to chat with me, but I got very bad vibes from the man. I tried to ignore him, but he kept pressing it. "Ah, come on man, lighten up. I see you are new here. What's it like working here? You see any real action?" My response was simply asking, "What type of bag would you like, sir?" "I will show you my bag if you show me yours," he said, then let out a belly laugh that almost knocked his glasses off as he kept smiling at me with a sick gleam in his eyes. After a moment, he finally said, "Plastic's fine, I suppose, just trying to lighten the mood. You look tense like you could use a break." I ignored him while bagging copious amounts of junk food, a pair of pliers, lube, condoms, and various chemicals like bleach and OxyClean. I had become slightly inured to the worst of the colorful characters and the concerning wares they purchased, but this one seemed particularly loathsome. "Yeah, you could definitely use a break. Hey, I know, I can give you a little pick-me-up in my car. I am right outside, help me take this stuff out and I'm your huckleberry." I couldn't even formulate a response. I couldn't think over my skin crawling away to another zip code. I resolved to just fall back on the rulebook line and proceeded to inform him that we are not allowed to leave the store with customers for any reason. To my horror and disgust, this one did not let the matter go. "Ah, come on, you're just playing hard to get. Seriously, I'm sure I can pay you more than these people. Come on, what do you say? Come on out and we can talk about it." I repeated the rules again while bagging the last of his items, but he would not let it go. "Hey, listen to me, you little nobody. You think you are too good for me? You think you are some kind of hot crap? Huh? Well, you are coming outside now. No one ignores me like this. I have a special treat in store for stubborn pricks who don't listen to me." His face was bright red and he was practically spitting the words at me. I panicked at first, but then I remembered the button by the bagging station. I pressed it discreetly while trying to hold my ground, shrinking slightly back to the vile tirade of the deranged individual. I took a step back and he moved forward, looking like he was going to grab me. To my surprise, a large gloved hand fell on his shoulder. I looked behind him and a nearly 7-foot tall man clad in a weird cross between police riot gear and military grade armor was holding him back. The customer turned around and started to yell at security. "Do you pricks know who I am? I know the owner. You will all be sorry you crossed me. I am going to..." And a sickening crunch was heard, followed by the man going limp. The guard holstered a now bloodied security baton and bent down over the dazed form of the customer. His eyes were glazed and he likely had a concussion, but he was still conscious and tried to speak when the security guard seized him by the throat and hoisted him back to his feet. The customer tried to whimper out a soft and confused sounding, wait, before he was punched so hard in the chest, I thought I heard his ribs break from where I was standing. The helmeted face of the guard turned to me, looked me up and down and asked, What type of bag was he using? I had no idea what that had to do with anything, but I answered on plastic. He was using plastic bags. I heard a chuckle under the mask and helmet of the guard, and he said, "Too bad he didn't pick paper." And the guard dumped out one of the man's bags. As he was trying to rise to his feet, the guard placed the plastic bag around the customer's head and tightened it. To my shock and horror, he proceeded to easily strangle him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and after a few moments it was over. I was speechless, and another guard came over and they took the customer's body on a stretcher to the back room. Benny, the store manager, had appeared out of nowhere and spoke to us. "I am sorry you had to see that, but I am glad you are safe. We take threats very seriously here and know you all need to be safe in such dangerous times. That is why we keep this place safe. Safe from dangerous people like that. I trust what happened here will also be safe and secure with you, right? After all, we wouldn't want you endangered by anyone like that knowing where you live, right?" He smiled at us and left to the back rooms. I understood the veiled threat and realized I would not be able to tell any real authorities or report on this madhouse. Despite that encounter, my night was not done yet and the worst was yet to come. Lee would not speak to me about what we both saw, and we tried to move on with the night and pretend what we saw happen didn't happen. It was getting close to 4 a.m. and we would be able to close soon. I was so close to being done with this place and getting out of there and home to my little girl. I just needed to hang on for a couple more days. There were only a few more customers lining up at the checkouts when something odd happened. A well-dressed man went to checkout number 2 and they shut off their light and said the scanner was not working anymore. It seemed fishy since it had been fine all night, but when the guarded looks and concerned faces flashed before me and then back at the well-dressed man, I realized that they might know something I didn't. My heart sank as I realized he might be one of those special customers. I looked over at Lee and he was visibly sweating and fumbling with the cash register. The man sauntered over to out checkout. He had a small basket with what looked like fine sewing thread, thimbles, and tailoring articles. It also contained a hacksaw, a plaster cast, and several boxes of nails and rivets that seemed to clash with the sewing equipment. By itself, I did not think anything of it and I relaxed a bit. Lee was pale and wordlessly scanned the small items he had. After they came down the conveyor, the man turned to me, tipped his hat, and introduced himself. "Good evening, my friend. My name is Henry Jaspin. I work for a little antique cloth shop and I'm here to get some materials." I relaxed a bit more. This did not seem too strange. I proceeded to ask, "What type of bags would you like today, Mr. Jaspin?" "Well, my good fellow, I should think paper for the small bits you see here. Indeed, I found all the tailoring kit I need to make work anyone would be proud of, but what I really need today are some raw materials. So the bag I really need will be a body bag tonight, preferably the larger variety." My mind was racing, my heart was pounding. Did he just say he needed a body bag? I was about to ask him to repeat it when it dawned on me. The rules had said, "A special bag request, you will know it when you hear it." I realized I had just encountered my first code black. I forced my trembling body to move and I pressed the black button under the bagging station. I heard an alert on nearby walkie-talkies. Code black on number 3. Confirmations were heard all around. There was a burst of motion near the back and I handed Mr. Jaspin his bag of smaller merchandise as Benny approached us. "Good evening, Mr. Jaspin." He managed to choke out the words, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "Oh, Benny, don't worry, I know what I asked for, and though you are a big fella, I wouldn't dream of picking you. We go too far back. Besides, your skin is terrible. Can you imagine one of our suits on you?" Mr. Jaspin let out a howl of laughter, and Benny followed suit with a nervous chuckle of his own. "Your new employee, however, he has a nice strong jaw and broad shoulders. Not as much meat, though." He looked me over, and I was confused and terrified at the implication of whatever it was he was talking about. As he was eyeing me, Benny spoke up saying, "Of course, you are free to pick as you please, but if I could suggest an option, we just picked up a rather unruly fellow who was just processed a few hours ago and he is on the larger side. Perhaps he would be a good alternative." "Of course, Benny, you and your new hire lead the way." I followed Benny in between him and Mr. Jaspin, who was behind us. We went into the back and then through keycard locked door that led into the basement. Benny shot me an apologetic look as we descended into the basement and I beheld what was down there for the first time. The place was very dark and freezing. I thought it might be another type of meat locker and I was not too far off. When the light switched on, I had to stifle a gasp of shock and horror. As soon as the room was illuminated, I saw it all. well. We were surrounded on all sides by rows and rows of body bags. Almost all of them were full, corpses leered out of many of them, all in various states of decomposition. I thought I was going to be sick. It looked like a morgue. I realized that we had been dealing with these products the whole time. I laughed quietly to myself in despair when I realized the options were paper, plastic, and apparently body bags. I thought of the conversation of selecting a person. I also thought of the other people who had handled Code Blacks and had not been seen again, like Rob. Rob was bagged. I stood there mouth agape, trembling at the horror of the nightmare room before me. While it all unfolded in stark terror to me, Mr. Jaspin calmly perused through the inventory of corpses. He would scrutinize them, pinching a cheek here and there and giving a tut-tut or moan of disdain. He came across the body Benny had pointed out and he said, My, he's a big fellow. A lot of material they would love to use. Skin is a little dry in places, a touch of eczema. That is all right though, Benny, old chum. You have a deal. I will tell Mr. Shy. Benny sighed in relief and started to guide me out of that nightmare dungeon. While leaving, I caught a look at Mr. Jaspin's pick, and I held my hand over my mouth to avoid gasping out loud. It was the belligerent customer from earlier. A large dent on his face from when it was smashed in by security. The face had a deathly pallor and his eyes were still leering, even in death. Why in the hell was he down here in a body bag? And why did it sound like he was just purchased? My mind was grasping for rationalizations for how and why this was all happening. Suddenly, Mr. Jaspin caught my hand and proceeded to place a card into my palm. As for you, my fine friend, we would love to have a worker like you at our establishment. She runs a tight ship here, but we are a bit more free-spirited at the tailor. Take care. And he departed with his horrific purchase. I was ushered upstairs in a daze, and I vaguely heard Benny talking with someone. I snapped back to my senses and saw a new face looking at me. He was an older man, and he had very intense, unblinking eyes that were boring into my soul as I stood there. He spoke to me in a stern but oddly soothing voice. I know you might be unsettled by what you saw, but she knew and the means to access it are natural parts of life. It is what you saw, it is what we sell. We sell it in all its forms. Why, it is even in our name. I hope you understand and do not consider anything foolish over the next few days. We value your work, but understand that some people lack the fortitude to deal with what our business does. Just don't forget that when you head back home to your house on 4th Avenue. The large cherry tree at the end of the street is blossoming and looks beautiful. You should take your daughter to see while it still blooms. He placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed while departing. I had no idea what I had just witnessed, but I knew I was in trouble. My mind was a jumble, and besides the imminent threat, I found myself considering something unrelated, a name. I thought about what Mr. Shy had said about Shy Nu and how we sell it. I looked again at the sign as I was leaving She's Nighttime Convenience and Grocery. I did not think anything of it at first, but I looked closer at the kanji by the first word. Looking up the meaning on my phone, I saw it was indeed the kanji for she sometimes used when counting as the number 4 in Japanese, but more often associated with something else. The dawning horror and simplicity of the name made sense now. Shy more often translates to death. I had worked almost an entire month at Death's Nighttime Convenience and Grocery. I did not go back, I quit. I will find another way to make the rest of the money I need. My family's safety is what is important now, and I know it is not safe for me and Danny here anymore. How could it be? When Mr. Death knows where we live. He turned up around 6 months ago. It was us students who noticed him first, since every day he'd walk past the town's high school at around the same time. The kids would be out in the yard, playing basketball and gossiping, would stop what they were doing to watch him stroll by. He never looked at us, but by God did we make a game out of looking at him. What got everyone was how he dressed. He didn't show a speck of skin. His entire body was covered with some piece of clothing. It looked like a kid who'd gotten into their parents' closet. Everything he wore was mismatched and tattered. Usually it'd be a long brown duster coat, tartan slacks, and a horribly stained shirt. Occasionally he'd throw in a scarf or a hat, or maybe a second coat under the duster. He wore gloves, sometimes leather, sometimes silk, and a tweed mask. His mask was hard to explain. It wrapped around his head perfectly with no visible seams or eye holes. We didn't know whether he could see or not, but he never had any trouble walking or crossing the road. I think it's the mask that really got people's imagination wearing. Some of the kids guessed he might have a rare skin disease. Others thought that he might have been a worker at the old chemical plant and was badly burned when the factory burnt down, but that would have made him at least 90 years old. A bunch of older kids spread the rumor that he was some sick serial killer laying low in our sleepy town, covering his face in case someone recognizes him from a wanted poster or breaking news bulletin. Everyone liked to propound from the sidelines, but no one had the guts to actually find out, not until tonight. It was the 26th of October. School had just ended for a week-long break and I was going to my first real party. I barely knew the guy whose house it was at, but I leapt at the chance of underage drinking. The night turned out great. We all had fun and managed to not throw up once. I downed a whole packet of apple-flavored chewing gum to try and mask the smell of alcohol on my breath from my parents, although I had a feeling they'd be able to tell anyway. Me and 3 close friends left the party just before 11 and set off staggering home. We passed my friend Luke's house first. As he walked up to his front door, a light came on and his mother stepped out, her face contorted with pure anger. We laughed at Luke and stumbled on our way as he realized he mixed up the dates and forgot to tell his parents he was going out tonight. Me, Shane, and Rowan kept messing around as we navigated our way back home. Shane's house was next, and since I lived so far out, I was planning on having a sleepover at Rowan's. We turned a corner, still laughing from a joke we made a block ago, and saw someone. All 3 of us crouched behind the fence, peeping out from behind to confirm our suspicions. Walking down the middle of the road was the masked man. He was in his usual getup, only he'd taken off his gloves. We all squinted to try and get a better look. The only light we had came from a pathetic, constantly buzzing street lamp, but we were desperate to finally see what he's been hiding. All of a sudden he turned and began walking up to a house. He stepped up onto the porch and opened the door. Just as he walked inside, we could see him slowly take off his mask and then the door slammed shut behind him. The 3 of us looked at each other, all thinking the same thing. The mystery of what the masked man looked like was still that, a mystery. He had his back to us and even in perfect daylight we wouldn't have been able to make his face out. The first one of us to commit our thoughts to speech was Shane. He told us, pumping out his chest, that he was gonna go see which of the rumors was true. He said he had a plan, and before me or Rowan could say anything, Shane was already halfway across the street. We looked at each other and followed him, coming up to the masked man's old house. It was noticeably more run down than the other houses on the block. The paint was peeling, the gutter had almost fallen down, and an upstairs window had been shattered. The 3 of us stood around the front door, keeping our voices low as Shane explained his grand plan. He said he was going to simply knock on the front door. When the masked man answered, he'd say, "Oh sorry, wrong house," and then just turn around and leave, but not before getting a good eyeful of him. We all thought that it was a flawless plan and egged him on as we took our hiding place behind a bush at the end of the masked man's property. As I got a good look at the house, I realized that I recognized it. My dad had this friend who had gone through a rough divorce. He slept in our spare room for a few weeks before he eventually won the house back in the court settlement. Around 6 months ago, he moved out of town without so much as a goodbye. I could remember when I was much younger him showing his car off to me. That thing was his pride and joy. I couldn't believe this was the same house. My thoughts were bisected by the sound of Shane rapping his knuckles on the front door. He turned to look at us and gave us a dumb grin and a thumbs up. I think he was about to crack a joke when the door opened. Standing at the entrance was the masked man. He'd taken off his mask, as well as most of his clothes. That much I could make out as he was still shrouded in shadows. There wasn't a single light on in his house, and to me and Rowan he wasn't anything more than a silhouette. As we both tried to discreetly get a better look, Shane began stuttering out his excuse. Suddenly he stopped. There was a pause before he began to scream in a shrill pitch. We watched as the masked man grabbed Shane by his lower jaw and violently yanked him inside the house, the door slamming shut behind him. Me and Rowan looked on in shock. I turned to Rowan to ask him what we should do, but before I could speak, he was up and running to the front door. He started pounding on it and yelling expletives. I ran up behind him and yanked him away. I held him and asked if he was crazy. As he began mumbling a response, the front door began to open. We both bolted like a greyhound out of a trap and dived behind the corner of the house. We stayed there, holding our breath and waiting to meet the same fate as Shane. Eventually, Rowan found enough courage to peep around the edge of the wall. He didn't see anyone. He moved out a little further and saw that the door was still closed. I pulled him back and told him that we should call the police. He snorted and explained to me that they'd probably arrest us for underage drinking. We'd spend the night in some jail cell, and by the time we could explain ourselves, Shane would be dead. Before I could question his reasoning, Rowan walked over to a window, cupped his hands and peeked in. I sighed, frustrated, and asked if he saw anything. He was replying with a long, drawn-out no. when suddenly he yelped and crouched down. Seeing his reaction, I instinctively did the same. I crawled over to him and in a voice just below a whisper, I asked him what he'd seen. I could see the fear in his eyes as he told me that saw the masked man, now mostly derobed, walking out from what he guessed was a door to the basement. After that, Rowan started muttering to himself about how the masked man must have seen him. I knew that Shane, my best friend for as long as I could remember, was in the basement. My stomach churned thinking about what I had to do next. I held my breath as I stood and peered in through the window. I couldn't see the masked man anywhere. I nudged the window and my suspicions were confirmed. Like the front door, the window was left unlocked and slightly ajar. I tried to steady my breath as I pulled the window all the way open. Rowan looked at me in shock as I asked him to give me a leg up. Still, he complied. Once I was inside, I pulled him in after me. Before I did, he grabbed a fist-sized rock from the garden. For self-defense, he told me. The house was perfectly still. Every surface was covered in a thin veneer of dust. We both stood there for a second, trying to hear the masked man. There wasn't a sound other than the faint dripping of some faraway faucet. In what we thought was relative safety, we crept our way to the door the masked man had emerged from. I gently opened it and sure enough, I was met with a staircase descending into the impenetrable darkness of the basement. I didn't dare call out Shane's name in fear that he wouldn't be the only one who'd hear me. Instead, I began my way down the stairs, Rowan following right behind me. My mother had given me a small wind-up torch so I could make my way home safely at night, she said. I fished around in my coat pocket for it, my hand clutching the familiar metal just as I reached the bottom. I found the button and switched it on, finally illuminating the room. It took me a while to realize what I was seeing, but judging from Rowan's deafening scream, he knew right away. Shane was hanging upside down from the ceiling, a chained hook driven through both of his ankles. He had long, fresh cuts across his throat, wrists, and legs, which were all pouring with blood. The blood dripped down into a series of angled metal sheeting, which directed the flow into a steel trough. There were 4 other bodies hanging from chains, all serving the same purpose. Some looked like they'd been there for weeks. We both turned and ran. As we scrambled back up the stairs, my torch beam fell on the figure standing motionless in the doorway. We slowly stepped back down the stairs until we were at the bottom again. We froze, watching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, the figure began to lift slowly off the ground. In an instant, it shot down the stairs, flying through the air like it had been thrown. I dived out of the way, but Rowan wasn't as lucky. The thing piled into him and pinned him to the ground. As I got to my feet, I saw it run its black, claw-like fingernails across his neck. I screamed and the masked man turned to look at me. It lifted itself to its feet and lunged. I grabbed the rusted hook dangling from the chain above me and swung it. It plowed into the front of the thing's head, caving it in. It went limp. The momentum from swinging the hook almost made me fall backwards into the trough of blood. I steadied my footing and dropped down next to Rowan. He laid motionless. There was a gaping wound along the side of his neck and he didn't so much as gurgle. I knew there was nothing I could do. With tears streaking down my cheeks, I turned and began to somberly make my way up the flight of stairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned to look and saw the masked man yank the rusted claw out of its head and stand. It straightened itself and turned to meet my gaze. I ran frantically up the remaining steps. I could hear the thing let out an animalistic screech as it flew through the air behind me. I burst out of the basement and into the living room, making a clear dash for the front door. The masked man threw itself into me, sending me spiraling. I landed on a glass coffee table, which shattered from the force. I lay in pain on a bed of broken glass as the creature that had killed my friends loomed. It dropped down on top of me and lowered its face agonizingly close to mine. It was now that I finally got a good look at what it looked like under the mask. The thing's face looked like a naked mole rat, bleached white with chemicals. Its eyes were a mess of tumors and scar tissue, filled with a black-purple pus festering in the sockets. The soft tissue of its nose and ears looked partially digested. The gums were black and oozing a mephitic ichor, lined with fragments of tooth bits. Its front 2 cuspids, however, looked perfectly maintained and began protruding even further out. They now looked longer than my index finger and as sharp as razor wire. I shoved a shard of glass deep into the thing's neck. It pierced clean through to the vertebrae, embedding itself. Black tar-like blood began to ooze, then spurt violently out of the wound. The masked man fell backwards, writhing around on the floor in pain. I staggered to my feet, limping to the front door before breaking into a half sprint. Afraid it would come after me, I ran straight to the next door neighbor. I began pounding in their door until I saw a light come on upstairs. I heard movement in the house and the door opened. Blinking the sleep out of his eyes and wearing a lime green bathrobe was Gary, my Sunday school teacher. He recognized me instantly and brought me into the safety of his home when he saw that I was drenched in blood. He laid a plastic sheet on a couch and told me to sit while he made tea. I sat and tried to catch my breath. I was still reeling from the night's events. Still, I felt safe in Gary's front room. It smelled like my grandma's house. I took out my phone and with a shaking finger tried to ring my mother. The kettle boiled and Gary poured my tea. He walked in from the kitchen, handed me the mug, and sat down next to me. We called the police and I spent the next few minutes trying to explain to him what had happened. Once I had, he seemed to go into shock. He just sat there, bound by my words. Eventually, he snapped out of it and slowly turned to look at me. He told me that I could go clean up in his downstairs bathroom, and I realized the state I must be in. He showed me to the bathroom and left me to wash myself. It felt good to scrub the fetid grime from my skin. I tried to avoid looking at myself in the mirror. I was drying my face with a hand towel when I heard a knocking at Gary's front door. I assumed it was either my mother or the police, and evidently so did Gary. The next thing I heard was his scream, followed by the door being thrown open. His screams were cut short and replaced with the bestial growl coming from what could only be the masked man. I turned to the bathroom door and frantically fumbled with the key, locking it. I dropped to the floor and curled up in a ball under the sink as I began to sob quietly to myself. I heard labored footsteps coming from the hallway. Within seconds, they were just outside the door. A low scratching noise came, followed by a thunderous pounding as the masked man tried desperately to break down the door. Its hinges rattled as wood began to splinter. The midsection buckled and split. I could hear the wailing of sirens as police cars neared as the masked man's hand crept from the hole in the door. It felt around for the lock as pus leaked from the soft flesh and exposed nerves surrounding its black-purple fingernails. I could hear vehicles pulling up outside as I watched it hook its talons around the key. It ripped it and the rest of the door handle from the wood, sending splinters flying around the room. A group of police officers made their way through the front door. One swore to God when he saw what was left of Gary. The bathroom door fell to the side. The masked man stood in the hallway, staring into my soul and priming its teeth, which began protruding even further from its gums. There was a deafening gunfire and I clasped my hands around my ears, screaming as I watched the masked man get shot maybe half a dozen times. It staggered back, then dropped to all fours as the police opened fire again. It climbed up the wall and began crawling upside down along the ceiling. 3 officers gave chase as one barged his way past the broken bathroom door and took my hand, leading me out of the house. I saw my mother's car parked amongst the police cars. She stood next to it, crying as 2 officers tried to console her. She saw me and ran over, wrapping me in her arms. The police kept me a little while longer to take a witness statement. Eventually, my mother convinced them to let me come home with her. They agreed, took our address, and told us that they'd call around tomorrow morning to talk further. I climbed into the back of my mother's car as she began to drive. She was silent, letting me rest as we neared our home. Soon, the rows of houses were replaced with trees. I watched them go by as I felt myself drifting off to sleep. The last thing I can remember of that night was seeing a white blur, something keeping pace with the car just beyond the tree line. I first got him in January. I was volunteering at the animal shelter when he was brought in, skinny and shivering. Lou said he'd been left outside, probably dumped there by an abusive owner as their first and only act of kindness towards him. He was terrified. I brought him home with me that evening. By February, my hands were covered in little scratches and I well and truly learnt my lesson about cuddles. He was a very proper cat. If he sat too still, you could almost mistake him for an ornate china ornament with his sleek black coat and pointed ears. Even though he'd been through an awful time of it, you could just tell there was a very proud cat waiting to reappear. I named him Raymond, which he seemed to approve of. He started eating his dinner on the floor next to me and would occasionally let me stroke his head without a hiss. By March, he would come to greet me at the door when I got home from work, skipping down the stairs from wherever he'd been dozing. His ribs had disappeared beneath his healthy coat, and his shiny green eyes seemed to smile at me. We were both doing well in April. My once scared cat had now become a confident, cuddly boy. I'd get to kiss him on the head goodbye as I left for my first few dates with Owen. Owen was charming and everything I'd ever dreamed of. I'd spend evenings with him in fancy restaurants, laughing away and hanging onto his every word. One evening in May, I was walking home from another wonderful evening when I tripped and fell smack bang in the middle of the pavement, leaving angry red grazes on each hand and knee. I hobbled home feeling sorry for myself and was greeted by a familiar mew at the door. I tried my best to give myself some first aid. and when I climbed into bed, Raymond appeared at my side. He sniffed at the haphazard plasters and stared at me, his green eyes big and curious. Nothing to worry about, Ray, I just tripped is all, I told him. Owen was always joking about how clumsy I could be. Raymond seemed to frown, wiggling his black tail in the air. Then he leaned forward and gently pressed his head against my grazes. I'm not sure how he did it, but his eyes seemed to roll back into his head, and I could have sworn they then began to glow. He sat like that, completely still for a few seconds before drifting off to sleep. When I peeled the plasters off the next morning, every mark had disappeared. I couldn't believe it. I spent ages running my fingers over my now smooth skin. Raymond just sat in the doorway and stared, his head tilted to the side. I wondered if I dreamed the whole thing, but in June it happened again. I'd been moving my things into Owen's flat when I'd caught my finger on his door latch, leaving a rather deep cut. Owen just tutted and went to pick up the box I'd dropped. Later, after Raymond had inspected our new home, he came for his evening cuddle. Owen was at the pub by then, and he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The poor cat was still so wary of certain people. I felt guilty for moving us in with Owen in a way, but he had insisted, and how could I say no? Raymond came to sit on my lap, and upon noticing my finger, his eyes immediately rolled back into his head and definitely glowed this time. I took off my bloody bandage to find again that any trace of the wound had vanished. Raymond purred softly as I stared at him, mouth agape. By the end of August, Raymond had healed a fair few scrapes and bruises for me. I'm ever so clumsy, of course, which Owen always ridiculed. If I'd known better, I'd have said he liked seeing me upset. Sometimes he would come home drunk and accidentally push me. On one occasion, he did this when I was cooking at the hob, and Raymond seemed to use all of his might healing my seeping burn. I spent an awful lot of time in pain and the rest lonely. I'd stopped volunteering at the animal shelter a few weeks before when Owen and I decided I should be working more hours to help pay the rent. I missed Lou and I missed my friends. We lived quite far from my parents too now, and I missed having friendly conversations that weren't just with Owen on a good day. I still had Raymond though. September went by in a bit of a blur. I found myself stuck in an unnerving state of trying to do everything just right. I would walk home from work slowly, savoring my time in the cold and the dark, but not too slowly, or Owen would question where I had been and with who. I didn't see anyone nowadays. I would make sure the dinner I made was exactly to Owen's standards, even though I knew that most of the time there would be a tiny, unseen detail that would set him off. He'd leave in a huff, taking my car to the pub round the corner. I'd sit in silence with Raymond while he was gone. I felt trapped. Raymond would give me a nudge or a purr, anything to get my attention, but I was frozen. I only moved again when I heard the door slam. I would look down at Raymond. He knew he was in for a long night too. In October on Halloween, things reached rock bottom. I was lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling when I heard Raymond gently push open the door. I'd been so worried about him. Owen had come home drunk again and almost tripped over Raymond, who was sleeping peacefully on the rug. I'd instinctively jumped up, rushing to keep my precious cat safe. Owen didn't like that. Now I was on the floor and I couldn't get up. I couldn't do much of anything anymore. "I'm sorry, Raymond," I whispered, feeling my lip begin to bleed again. I started to cry and the tears stung my swollen eyes. "I'm sorry I brought us here." He gently brushed his face against my blackened cheek, and I felt like dirt. My tears splashed against the cold floorboards. Raymond deserved so much more than being stuck with me. I couldn't even keep him safe. The door slammed suddenly. I had to grip my teeth to keep from screaming when my broken bones ground together as I jumped. Owen was home. His heavy footsteps dragged through the hall, the sickly smell of whiskey surrounding him like a storm cloud. He swayed as he came into the room. His bloodshot eyes quickly focused on me. He walked over and let out a chuckle, giving my snapped leg a swift kick. "Get up then," he sneered. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to move, but the sharp pain in my chest pinned me to the floor. My breath was coming in shallow gasps, and my broken ribs felt like knives carving into my lungs. "Pathetic," Owen spat, laying there, feeling sorry for yourself. "This is your fault. It always is." Raymond began to growl beside me, but Owen ignored it. He dug his fingers into my swollen face. "You're completely useless now," Raymond hissed. Something had changed in him. His sleek black form, normally so calm, was now tensed. His muscles rippled beneath his fur and his green eyes honed in on Owen. They began to glow eerily under the flickering light. Owen laughed, releasing his grip on my jaw. "Oh, look at this. You're stupid, cat. He'll protect you." Before Owen could reach out for him, something in the air shifted. The pressure dropped and the room felt heavy. Raymond's growl deepened, sounding far more primal. His eyes weren't just glowing anymore, they were burning. Owen staggered back, his face contorting into confusion and then pain. "What the hell?" he started started, his words cut off by a scream. I could only watch, wide-eyed, as Owen's body began to jerk violently. His arm twisted, the bones snapping with a sickening crunch. He screamed again, the sound ripping from his throat as his skin began to stretch and split. Hot blood oozed from the cracks like lava. My own injuries, the burns, the broken bones, the bruises, began to fade. I felt them peeling from my body as Raymond had done 100 times before, but this time he was putting them straight into Owen. His knees buckled as another snap echoed through the room. His leg was bent at an impossible angle, the flesh tearing as though he was being pulled apart from the inside out. Raymond, no, I whispered, but the word felt hollow. Could I even stop him? Did I even want to, really? The cat's gaze never left Owen. His tail flicked in a deliberate motion, and Owen screamed again. This time it was louder, higher pitched as his ribs caved inwards with a wet, crunching sound. Despite everything that he'd done, I hoped that the alcohol was dulling some of the pain, at least a tiny bit. Owen convulsed as his spine twisted, vertebrae snapping like dry twigs. Blood sprayed from his mouth and his hands clawed uselessly in the air. He was reaching out for me. Over the next few minutes, I squeezed my eyes closed as I listened to every crack and snap. It was slow and deliberate. Raymond was savoring this. Finally, Owen collapsed onto his front. His body was barely recognizable, and a shudder racked through me as I realized it was a mirror image to how mine had looked only an hour before. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. He looked at me, trying to plead, his eyes wide with terror. He was a wounded animal. I don't know what came over me, but I looked over at Raymond and nodded. I looked away when my cat's jaw began to unhinge, stretching wider than it should ever be able to. I still heard, though, the sound of Owen disappearing into the gaping maw. I heard the crunch. When I turned back around, Raymond was a cat once more. He licked his paw and used it to wipe a drop of blood from his sleek head. There was no sign of the monster I had seen only seconds before. There was no trace at all of Owen. Raymond purred contentedly. It's December now, and things are much different. My parents hug me goodbye on their way to work, and usually Dad makes me breakfast even when I insist I'm not hungry. He says I'm much too thin. In the evening, we spend time together as a family, the wood burner crackling and Raymond sleeping soundly in front of it. I tell myself that I'm safe now, that it's over, but as I look at him sleeping there, I wonder what else he's capable of. I don't know if I'll ever feel like myself again. I don't really remember who she is. I have nightmares most nights. The sound of shouting will echo through my head, followed by the snapping of bones. My mom helps me talk about what happened. Well, most of it. The important thing is that it's all over. While I've been recovering, I've been trying my best to do some research. I'm still not 100% sure what breed Raymond is, though. I just know that he's a very, very good cat.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.